survive and thrive, and part of that is also focusing on workers, specifically focusing on women workers. We know a number of them have dropped out of the workforce during the pandemic, so he's going to be talking about that. So while this isn't going to be something that he's going to, I think, maybe focus on the two women standing behind him, what he's going to be talking about in his speech goes straight to that, talking about racial justice, talking about the need to change policing in this country. All of those things are going to be top of mind as he takes to the podium with those two women in those historic positions.
Yeah, I mean, it will be remarkable to see, but Michael, that is the thing that is different. I mean, I don't know how people have tried to minimize what happened on January 6th. I can't get it out of my mind. I'm sure that you can't get it out of your mind as a historian, as just as a human being. But it strikes me that not only will Biden, as Yamiche said, be there talking about what he's calling the worst attack on our country since the Civil War, strong language, but he'll be doing it in front of some of the insurrectionist supporters. Ted Cruz will be there. People like Kevin McCarthy, who voted to overturn the election, Lauren Boebert, Representative Andy Biggs, who was said by even Ali Alexander, was one of the organizers. Hey, he helped me do this. Cindy Hyde-Smith, Roger Marshall, Rick Scott. That to me is, I don't know, what is it to you?
I think it is strange and horrible and something we didn't even see at the time of the Civil War, because, you know, when Abraham Lincoln would send a message to the Congress, he wasn't sending it to Jefferson Davis and people like that who had served in Congress, because they fled. You know, the South seceded and they were gone. And the result was that Lincoln, at least when he, you know, sent messages to Congress, was sending messages to people who, by and large, wanted to see the nation survive. So that's a little bit different. And this was the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. You know, Pearl Harbor cost maybe 2,400 lives, and 9/11, another terrible attack, 3,000. But in those cases, our democracy was not in jeopardy. Just as Yamiche was saying, think of the 6th of January, if those terrorists who committed that attack on our Capitol had been a little bit faster, they could have and probably would have executed the vice president, executed the Speaker of the House, executed other members and leaders of Congress, possibly started a hostage crisis, kidnapped the mahogany boxes in which there were ballots that were saying that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would be the next president and vice president. Had that happened, I have no doubt they would have demanded that Joe Biden's inauguration be suspended and perhaps insisted that Donald Trump be re-inaugurated as president as the price of any of this hostage crisis.
Yeah, and just to make that point, let me play for you, and those of you who haven't seen the whole interview, you should really see it. Accommodations to my friend Don Lemon at CNN, who interviewed Michael Fanone. You've seen him on TV before talking about his experience, but not like this. This is part of that interview where he talked about what he experienced on January 6th as a Capitol Police officer.
I experienced a group of individuals that were trying to kill me to accomplish, you know, their goal. Yeah, I mean, I experienced the most brutal, savage, hand-to-hand combat of my entire life. How we managed to make it out of that day without more significant loss of life is a miracle.
And these are people that Senator Ron Johnson has described as people he didn't fear at all. He thought they were fine. Donald Trump said he loved them. I cannot get past that, Michael Beschloss. And there will be Capitol Police officers stationed there as well. And they're, you know, it's an interesting thing that they're all going to have to re-experience together on this momentous night.
That's exactly right. And one nice thing about this evening is that for Joe Biden to go in there and give a speech in a way that seems similar to the way that other presidents have, all the way back to George Washington, sort of closes the circle. But the danger to democracy is still there, as Joe Biden is also going to say tonight. There are still groups in this country, even in Congress, just as you were saying, Joy, who would like to see this union torn apart, who are plotting against our democracy. If Joe Biden fails as president, that might be more likely.
And if exactly, and then there's if he succeeds as president, Yamiche, because Joe Biden has given himself a very lengthy to-do list. What the things that he's already gotten through, the Recovery Act is $1.9 trillion. It's pretty huge. Joining the Paris Climate Accord and things like that, the sanctions on Russia, the ending the war in Afghanistan and bringing our troops home. So that's a big deal. But the things he wants to do, Another $1.8 trillion in this American Family Plan, $2 trillion in an American Infrastructure Plan, voting rights legislation, the George Floyd Justice Act, which seems awfully urgent, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, rolling back tax cuts to corporations, things that are really popular, that poll really well. He's already accomplished probably the biggest thing on his to-do list, which is start to beat back the pandemic that's killed, more than 500,000 Americans. What is the White House, how big is he going to go on the pressure that he will use this speech to try to put on those self-same Republicans who he's got to deal with to try to get this agenda through?
Well, this speech and this big moment for President Biden is going to be all about pushing Congress, pushing lawmakers, people standing right in front of him, sitting right in front of him, to do something and to legislate. He's going to be talking about $6 trillion in spending. If you take them all together, there's the American Rescue Act, which of course was focused on COVID, the Jobs Plan, which is really about jobs and infrastructure and roads and bridges, and then the Families Act, which is of course education and health care and medical leave and all of the different things that the president says will be really a generational investment to help Americans survive and thrive amid this pandemic and this economic crisis, along with the racial reckoning. So a lot of this is going to be the president ticking through, saying you need to pass the Policing Act, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. You need to pass immigration so that DACA recipients, dreamers, as well as farm workers and immigrants in this country who have contributed so much without legal status, that they should all get a pathway to citizenship. He's going to be talking about the role that the vice president is planning in trying to root out the root causes of immigration issues, working with the Northern Triangle countries. And he's also been focusing on trying to also just pass legislation on gun reforms, talking about the tragedies that we've all had to live with, these mass shootings. So the president really is going to be talking at length about all of the different ways that he wants to see these lawmakers actually act and pass legislation.
I'll say it again. People like government, they can see and feel in front of them. They can see it in their bank account. They can see it in roads. They can see it in a bridge. They can see it in their lives. That's what people, and he understands that. That is his superpower. One of his superpowers. The other one is kindness. Yamiche Alcindor, Michael Betschloss, thank you both very much. Coming up, we are still waiting for authorities to release body cam footage from that deadly shooting last week in North Carolina. Meanwhile, there's yet another case of a man dying under an officer's knee, this time in California. We'll be right back.
Before discovering Nexium 24-hour
Tonight, it's been a long time. It's a very late addressment to Congress. He has had some accomplishments. Many people have pointed out, myself included, he's had some failures. What do you expect tonight? What's going to be happening?
Tammy, thank you. First of all, it's great to be with you tonight. And we are looking forward to this address. We've been looking forward to it for some time. Generally, we see these in February. And I think in keeping with sort of the tone of the Biden campaign and the Biden presidency, it's going to be sort of a quiet affair. There's only going to be about 200 people in the audience. You won't have that sort of, bully and handshakes and all of that, at least not to the extent that we're used to on the way in. And I expect, I was listening to your commentary in the beginning, and I think that that it's right on the mark. I do expect that we're going to see sort of a very quiet, measured, tempered Joe Biden in the way he speaks about where we are as a nation. I was thinking to myself, I wonder what it would be like if it was President Trump tonight. And I think you'd be hearing a message of, we're open for business, we're cutting taxes, we're lowering regulations, we want businesses to be on fire, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But I think you're going to hear, we're going to protect you, we're going to take care of you, we're going to hold your hand from cradle to grave, essentially, because it is about pre-K and then it's about elder care. So literally, a government sort of embrace from childhood into elder care is what we're going to hear a lot about tonight, and that has gotten President Biden a lot of traction from his side of the aisle, to be sure.
Now, what's interesting, too, is you're right. The delivery will be modulated. It'll be a moderate-sounding delivery. It's important, though, that people really listen to what he's saying, not just the nature of how he's saying it, because that's how President Trump was attacked often, was his manner, perhaps, his delivery was somewhat surprising. But what really does matter, clearly, is their intentions and the actual outcomes of policy, right? And we are going to hear some of that, and it's going to be, though paid for, they say. It's already paid for, but in fact, it's not been paid for. Maybe half. The analysts are saying they can't figure out where at least half of it and how it will be paid for. Obviously, he's not going to hang on that. And then there's the other issues like the border. Will he even address the border? Like, what could he say about the border since it's such a mess? Do you think he'll avoid certain things?
You know, in terms of paying, Tammy, I think we've all, it's pretty scary, but we've almost gotten past the whole notion that anything should be paid for. All of these spending programs go out 15 years, you know, far beyond any one person's presidency. So it's like, let that person worry about it, you know. We'll see, you know, we're not worried about going to get paid for at this point. The other thing I would point out is that although they've been really emphasizing from the White House that it's only going to be the 1% who pay for this. If you make less than $400,000, you're not going to have to pay any additional taxes in this plan. However, when you tax on corporate taxes, when you add in those kinds of measures, what you see is companies tightening their belts, not expanding, not hiring new employees. You see them recoiling from growing their businesses.
And then can we believe them even?
All of these peripheral things have a big impact on everybody's pocket.
If we can even believe them, because it was the same confidence with which they said we can keep our doctor. And then it relies on a class war. Like, oh, well, we're just going to tax those people, but those are the people who are creating the businesses and the jobs that we then rely on to be consumers and to live our lives and everything else. There's only going to be 200 people in the audience. Do you think that's going to be a factor in what the response is going to be? And do you think that is something that he'll feed off on? And how long do you think this will go? Do you think it'll be past 30 minutes, maybe an hour?
You know, we thought that the first press conference might be short based on what we had seen over the course of the campaign. And I think when he's in this environment, I think he will handle it completely fine. You know, I think he'll stand up there and probably talk for about an hour like most presidents do. But in terms of the audience, you know, I think back to covering this campaign. I remember when we were in Delaware and there were cars lined up and they were honking. You know, he has had all kinds of strange COVID era environments to function in, and he's done just fine. I think he would be shocked if, you know, if the room were full. I think there would be, you know, some panic in some quarters of this administration. That's one other thing I would make a point on, Tammy, is that just that in terms of COVID and optimism, you know, it would be great to hear a message of, you know, real optimism about the future, enthusiasm about how far we've come, excitement about what's around the corner for the country. We've seen, you know, such a measured, you know, I think when the president came out the other day and said, you know, guess what? You can take off your mask and be in a small gathering outdoors with your family if you're all vaccinated. I think a lot of people across the country just said, well, we were doing that for quite a while. Exactly.
Sorry, right? But you're right, because we look to the president for optimism. And this will be the test to see if he can actually deliver that in some regard. Martha, great seeing you. Thank you. Have fun tonight. It's going to be very exciting.
Good to see you.
All right. And now coming up, the Biden administration is going after Rudy Giuliani tonight. The latest after they raided his home today. Plus, President Biden now painting a rosy picture of the new IRS. How it comes after Democrats just reversed a bill protecting people from being targeted because of their political preferences. Great. Jason Chaffetz joins me straight ahead.
Tucker Carlson Originals exclusively on Fox Nation.
Day in office. President Biden makes his first address to a joint session of Congress tonight. Watch live coverage beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN, online at cspan.org, or listen on the free C-SPAN radio app. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day, we're taking...
Last question will go to Mike McKee.
Have come to light. Last week, 42-year-old Andrew Brown Jr. was shot and killed in his car by sheriff's deputies in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. They were carrying out a search warrant. The shooting has led to growing protests, even as new details emerged today. District Attorney Andrew Womble said Brown hit officers with his car before police fired.
The next movement of the car is forward. It is in the direction of law enforcement and makes contact with law enforcement. It is then and only then that you hear shots.
Also today, a judge denied a request for releasing police body camera videos from the incident to the public. Earlier this week, the Brown family and attorneys were allowed to view a 20-second clip. and were granted access to more footage today.
They run up to his vehicle shooting. He still stood there, sat there in his vehicle with his hands on the steering wheel while being shot at. He finally decides to try to get away, and he backs out, not going towards the officers at all. There was at no time in the 20 seconds that we saw where he was threatening the officers in any kind of way.
The Brown family also commissioned an autopsy that confirmed their view that the killing was unjustified. Brown's son spoke on Tuesday.
Yesterday, I said executed. This autopsy report showed me that was correct.
I'm coming to check on you, make sure you're okay. Somebody called.
Across the country, in Alameda, California, police released body camera video on Tuesday of an arrest from April 19th. Officers had received a 911 call for a man who appeared drunk or disoriented.
Come over here, we don't want you to fall down, okay? I got it.
When 26-year-old Mario Gonzalez didn't show ID, officers attempted to arrest him. As Gonzalez struggled, they pinned him to the ground with their knees and elbows on Gonzalez's back for more than 5 minutes. Gonzalez stopped breathing and soon died in an incident that conjures up images of George Floyd's death. In Chicago today, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability released footage of a fatal police shooting of a 22-year-old man from last month. The video shows police in a foot chase with Anthony Alvarez and an officer yelling at him to drop the gun seconds before firing.
Hey, drop the gun! Drop the gun!
A handgun was found at the scene. And in Loveland, Colorado, surveillance footage was made public Monday that showed police officer Austin Hopp joking about dislocating a 73-year-old woman's shoulder as he arrested her. Last June, Karen Garner, a woman with dementia, left a Walmart with about $14 worth of items without paying. She was stopped by police while walking and forcefully arrested. Her attorney says she sustained multiple injuries during the incident, including a broken arm.
We take a deeper look at America's policing practices and the obstacles to meaningful reform with Christy Lopez. She oversaw so-called pattern or practice investigations of police departments at the Department of Justice from 2010 to 2017. She now teaches law at, she teaches criminal justice at Georgetown Law, where she co-directs their innovative policing program. Professor Lopez, thank you so much for joining the NewsHour. It was body cam videos worn by police that brought many of these incidents we just reported on to light. What is your take on the usefulness of these cameras and whether they're doing what they're supposed to do as far as police accountability?
Yeah, thank you for having me. As difficult as it is to watch that body cam footage, I do think it's a very important tool for transparency and accountability. It's not a panacea. It absolutely has to be supported by the right policies, the right training, the right leadership, so that we do more than just see those videos. We have to see those videos and learn from them and change the way policing happens.
They don't seem to be acting as a deterrent in some cases. A lot of these incidents actually happened around former officer Chauvin's trial and his conviction. Why has it been so difficult, after all of these years of discussions about police training, implicit bias, changing police culture, why has it been so difficult to change police response, especially when it comes to the use of lethal force?
Well, there is some indication that body cameras do change behavior, but we need to do so much more than just change some behavior. One of the reasons it's so hard to change policing is that there are 18,000 police agencies and there's no centralized, really, regulation of them. So, you can be doing things completely right in one place and completely wrong in thousands of other places. The other reason that it's really difficult to change policing is that much of what is wrong with policing comes from outside policing. To some extent, police do what we ask them to do. and we have made a lot of incredibly harmful policing perfectly legal. We ask them to respond to situations all the time that really they're not the best tool for the task. When you have that, and you have that happening millions of times every year, you're going to have some really negative outcomes that could have been avoided.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about what you're referring to there. You wrote recently in an opinion piece for the Washington Post that we have turned policing into an impossible endeavor, one that underprotects communities even as it needlessly provokes conflict. You talk about how police are responding to everything from traffic stops to active shooters. How can that lead to more police violence, and what can be done about that?
Yeah, the problem is that we've come to over-rely on policing for our public safety needs, and sometimes we rely on them for all sorts of things we shouldn't be relying on them for example, raising revenue. And so just to take the example of traffic enforcement, a lot of police stops happen every year, 20 million of them, and many of those stops, millions of those stops, have nothing to do with traffic safety. They might have to do with an agency being used to raise revenue for its city. They might be happening because officers are urged to use stops as a pretext to search for drugs or guns. When that happens, individuals being stopped know they're not being stopped for any genuine public safety reason. They're annoyed, sometimes like Lieutenant Nazario, who we saw in a video a few weeks ago. They're terrified. And police, they're very used to these stops. They aren't sensitive to the harm that people feel, and they're used to having their way. And so that's just a recipe for conflict.
And we saw in one of those videos that in some cases they're referring to people, they're being called on cases where people clearly have dementia or some other sort of mental illness that they're also having to cope with. I want to talk about federal oversight because you actually led a federal investigation after the killing of Michael Brown in 2014 into the Ferguson Police Department. We now do have federal agencies looking into several of the incidents and a few of the police departments involved in recent incidents of police violence. What can these probes and consent decrees do, and what can they not do to reform police?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and you're absolutely right. We don't need police responding to individuals who have dementia who took $14 worth of goods from Walmart, and that's exactly what decrees like this are meant to address. I thought it was really encouraging that both of the investigations announced by the Department of Justice of Louisville and of Minneapolis specifically talk about the fact that they're going to look at the police response to individuals who are in who have behavioral health disabilities. That includes people with mental health crises, that includes people with dementia, that includes people with autism. And those are the kinds of interactions that probably, we know most of the time do not need a police response. And when you get a police response, they don't have the training, they can often traumatize people just because they have guns and handcuffs, and that's not the kind of response we need. So it's really encouraging that the Department of Justice seems to be hearing what communities have been saying, that we need a different response besides police for individuals who are in behavioral health crisis. And hopefully they'll be working with Minneapolis and with Louisville to come up with better responses to situations like that rather than sending police.
As you said, there is no one panacea that's been identified yet. Christy Lopez with Georgetown Law, thank you for joining us with your insights.
Thank you for having me.
SIOUX.com.
And where that information is coming from and that it's, in fact, accurate and true.
Some believe they don't need a vaccine because they already got COVID, but health officials say that is not the case.
Particularly because of the spread of variants. Dr. David Basil of Avera Health says that the UK and California variants are now the most common strains that they are seeing in the area.
That's probably why we saw the numbers increase through March and April, because they do spread faster, and it is more important to get that even vaccine immunity. That's the other reason why you want to make sure and get vaccinated, is that the natural immunity from that first strain is probably not as effective against those variants. So it's important to get vaccinated even if you have had COVID in the past.
And when it comes to encouraging young people to get a shot, Dr. Basil pointing to upcoming graduation ceremonies as possible spreading events, and that vaccines will go a long way in preventing that. Well, we may finally have found the solution to rid ourselves of winter. I also hope I don't speak too soon. Tyler Rennie says a warm forecast is in fact in our future. He's back in about 2.5 minutes.
Some people won't understand.
For our ability to build trust, we've got to, make sure that we are doing everything in this regard.
So the Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who of course was in charge of the Derek Chauvin trial, sat down with CBS's 60 Minutes. He addressed a crucial question: whether Derek Chauvin was motivated by racial bias when he killed George Floyd. I wanted to play the exchange for you.
Was this a hate crime? I wouldn't call it that, because hate crimes are crimes where there's an explicit motive and of bias. We don't have any evidence that Derek Chauvin factored in George Floyd's race as he did what he did.
Obviously, it's an extremely significant thing that Keith Ellison said there. It is obviously not how a lot of Americans feel, and that answer, of course, could color what people expect in terms of police reform and trials going forward. What do you think about what Attorney General Ellison said?
Well, I think while we are all relieved with the guilty verdict in that case, we know that that George Floyd, one, is still dead. So many others are dead. The very next day after that verdict, there was another killing. I certainly don't know what motivated Chauvin as he pressed his knee against the neck of George Floyd for 9.5 minutes. But it's very hard to believe that that would be the case if George Floyd was a white man, that he would have done the same thing and treated him the same way. Obviously, again, I don't know what was going through his mind or what motivated him, but that is not good policing. That's the bottom line. Too many people are dying, and too many people who look like me are dying. And so we have to change the system and the conditions that led to so many senseless deaths. And that is the work that we are undertaking here in Boston, and the work that needs to happen all across our country.
All right, Mayor Janey, thank you very much. I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
And out front next, the Justice Department just releasing shocking new video of the moment Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick was attacked by rioters with pepper spray. Plus, officials in Washington now beefing up security as President Biden prepares to give his first major speech to Congress since the insurrection.
How great is it that we get to tell everybody how Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance?
In Mulbridge area, but we're really not going to be seeing much of anything adding up there because we're going to be looking at dry conditions sticking around for the rest of the night tonight. Temperatures, they're back in the 60s and 70s. I mean, it is very pleasant outside, and the one thing that's helping conditions be a little bit easier to deal with outside is the fact that the wind is finally not that strong. On average, it's about 5 to 10 miles an hour. This does change tomorrow, though, as a cold front moves through, and while it's not going to bring any rainfall with it, it will decrease our temperatures by just a couple of degrees and increase our wind speed for tomorrow. As a matter of fact, we're going to be starting out very mild tomorrow, low to mid-40s, but then as that cold front moves through, you really won't notice it. The only thing you'll notice tomorrow will be the wind increasing in speed because temperatures tomorrow still get back to the 60s to right around 70 degrees. It gets better yet for Friday. We'll start to see more 80s making a comeback along and west of the Missouri on Friday and still getting into the 70s for the eastern half of the area. Beautiful way to end the month of April and start the month of May. Now the wind stays light tonight and it will briefly pick up early tomorrow morning in northeastern South Dakota, and then all of us will experience the breezy conditions throughout tomorrow afternoon. Heading into early Friday morning, though, temperatures, or rather the wind speed, will still be about 5 to 10 miles an hour. So it does decrease. And as far as futurecast goes for tonight, may see a few sprinkles in extreme northeastern South Dakota. Not looking very likely, but that's really our only rain chance over these next couple of days. Sunshine's back tomorrow, and it's back again on Friday at...
And that famous picture of her standing up in a room around a table that is almost entirely male, pointing her finger at Donald Trump before leading a Democratic walk out of that meeting. That was, by the way, the last time the two of them had a conversation. The White House put out that picture thinking it made Nancy Pelosi look unhinged. She seized on the picture and distributed it thinking it made her look like she was in charge.
And what about President Biden? I mean, she clearly was very happy that he won and that President Trump lost. But how do you see her fitting into what he's trying to do?
I think she is closer to President Biden than to any other president with whom she has served. She says that he's so sophisticated, so experienced in matters on Capitol Hill, they can speak in shorthand. She called him a transformative president. I think that she sees this as a great capstone to her remarkable political career.
And they certainly share a long tenure in the Congress. Last thing, Susan, how would you describe what drives Nancy Pelosi? What does she want her legacy to be, do you think?
If you ask her what drives her, she'll say it's concern about children. She has a very consistent message about that. She's a New Deal Democrat, just like her dad. Her dad was close to FDR, so close that he named his second son Franklin Delano Roosevelt D'Alessandro. And the values of the New Deal are values that Nancy Pelosi continues to carry forward in terms of trying to help people who are in need, seeing a role for a big government, not a small one.
Well, it is a fascinating read. Madam Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Lessons of Power. Susan Page, thank you. Thank you very much.
Judy, thank you.
Apollo 11 astronaut Michael Collins died today at 69. He stayed in lunar orbit alone for more than 20 hours, while Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made the first landing on the moon. Collins said he had no regrets. He said he was focused instead on making sure that his crewmates could return home. During the 50th anniversary of that, Collins told Miles O'Brien that he was mesmerized by our planet.
On their ride back home, they marveled at our perch in the universe. The moon was their destination, but for Collins, the real discovery was Earth itself.
Right, I've got the world at my window for change.
The moon was nothing compared to my view of home planet. It was the main chance. I'd look out the window and there it would be, a tiny little thing. You could obscure it with your thumb, but every time you put it away somewhere, it'd pop out. It wanted you to look at it. It wanted to be seen. It was gorgeous. It was tiny, shiny, the blue of the oceans, the white of the clouds, little streak of rust color that we call continents. It just glowed. Having gone out 240,000 miles and seeing it gives me a much greater sense of fragility, a much greater urge to do something to protect that fragility as we go along.
Such a great memory. Michael Collins was 90 years old.
And it's understandable, there's security. We want nothing to happen to anyone. What do you think will be happening at the end of this? Is this going to be perpetual occupation, or is this going to change?
Well, first, I think it's important to go back in history a little bit to June of 2020, when House then Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi argued that the National Guard being called in by President Trump to protect the city from riots, looting, and burning of churches was the militarization of the Washington, D.C., of the nation's capital. It was inappropriate. The National Guard troops were there. Fast forward now, and you have Nancy Pelosi, who is now the Speaker of the House, who's perfectly fine with having National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. by the thousands for months on end. You'll remember, Tammy, that in March of this year, the head of the National Guard, a general, wrote a letter to the Pentagon saying, we are overworked, we don't have enough volunteers, our National Guard troops cannot fulfill their missions in Washington, D.C., not to mention across the country in their home states as we face other crises in those home states, and they need to go home. We can't complete our mission and we don't have a plan B. That was also rejected. And then let's not forget that they should be sent home because they are now being framed as extremists. Right. There were calls from members of Congress who said that they needed to be investigated for extremist ties and white supremacy, giving no evidence of what that exactly means and how they were going to go about that vetting and witch hunting. So they've been here for so long for a political purpose, and certainly it's far past time for them to go home.
Yeah, this has been theater. And speaking of theater, Lisa, you were a New Yorker. You've moved to Florida. You know the difference between free and not free. We've got more theater with this mask. We're going to see it tonight. He's going to walk in, take off his mask to speak, violating one of Nancy Pelosi's House rules. When it comes to COVID, what do you think when we're dealing with these new regulations? Is that on the way out, or is this going to be the perpetual pandemic that will never end?
Well, it'll be a perpetual pandemic because it's not about keeping Americans safe. It's about controlling them, which is why they still don't want Americans to be free, even after receiving the vaccine. But I also want to make a point, if I can, about the National Guard still being in D.C.
Or if you plan to or recently received a vaccine.
Nothing is everything. Now is the time to ask your dermatologist about Skyrizi.
UFO's Active Recovery. UFO technology absorbs impact with every step, so your body doesn't have to. Because standing still gets you nowhere. Get yours today at ufos.com. Overstock's where you find it. A sofa, a floor lamp, an area rug.
State officials never imposed statewide travel restrictions or statewide mask mandates at the height of the pandemic. In the summer of 2020, ads encouraged people to visit South Dakota.
People are often asking me, when did things turn around for South Dakota? When did you see the dial flip? And it really was on May 22nd, where we saw the number of arrivals into South Dakota, that huge flip. People decided we're coming to South Dakota.
State Secretary of Tourism Jim Hagan says the state also received a boost last July from Mount.
I'm Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill, and this is CNN.
President Biden moments away from giving his first major speech to the nation in a joint session of Congress. It will not be what we're used to seeing, of course, from the House chamber. It's an extreme and different setting because of the pandemic and the current COVID protocols. And of course, security is very tight, given it's the first major event at the Capitol since the insurrection, so there's stepped up police presence. Law enforcement vehicles, first responders are on site in preparation. 200 people on the guest list, that's it. That means most of the 1,600 seat space will be empty. So in a break from tradition, seats are going to be assigned. There are 4 empty seats between each member of Congress. Another break from the norm. Some of them will be sitting in the gallery above the floor of the House. The president will be wearing a mask until he reaches the podium, and then he'll take it off. He is fully vaccinated. There will be no designated survivor tonight, as most cabinet members are going to be watching from off-site locations. It's going to be pretty interesting to watch and sort of unsettling, I'm sure, in some ways. It is a night of many firsts, but it is coming up in just an hour. Thanks so much for joining us. Our coverage of President Biden's first address to a joint session of Congress continues now with a special edition of AC 360.
Live picture of the U.S. Capitol where in just under an hour, Joe Biden, who spent 36 years in the audience on nights like this, will get his chance to deliver his very first address to a joint session of Congress as President of the United States.
Going on in the country, and to reassure you that everything's going to be fine, just fine, in fact, better than it was. In that way, it has the same narcotic intent of the Biden campaign itself. Remember that? Don't worry.
His critical speech. That's right, Anderson. President Biden will declare that America is on the move again tonight as he touts progress in battling the pandemic and revitalizing the economy. We're learning that President Biden also will address some of the thorniest challenges of his next 100 days. We're told he will directly appeal to viewers at home to get vaccinated if they have not already. Take
Friend George Gray!
Lighten your load. And I'm gonna hire.
What about avant-garde
Global warming.
And it's reported that President Biden will be discussing two new plans tonight. Number one is an infrastructure bill. The other is the American Families Plan, a $1.8 trillion proposal. The President will be on the road all week promoting this proposal as well. Well, here's a look at who's going to be in the House chamber tonight. Only 80 members from the House will be there out of 435, 40 Democrats and 40 Republicans, and 60% of the Senate will be there, 30 Democrats and 30 Republicans. Some of the notable names include Chief Justice John Roberts and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair General Mark Milley, along with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Well, Elena Treen covers the Congress for the Axios publication. Ms. Treen, this is a little bit late in an administration to give a first address to Congress, isn't it? Why the delay?
It is. I think that the Biden administration needed to figure out how some sort of address would be possible in a pandemic, and that's the reason that they gave for this. And they timed it around, of course, his first 100 days in office, and so they thought that timing paired nicely with a large number of members of Congress being vaccinated. Of course, most people at the White House, if not all at this point, are vaccinated, so it's a much safer time to do it than when he first took office. But you're right, it's a lot later than what a lot of his predecessors did when they gave their first speech or joint address to Congress. And I think that means that we should expect President Biden to go into much more detail about his achievements so far in office, some of the big packages that he has been able to pass or that he's planning to hopefully pass in the future. All of that we should expect tonight in far greater detail than we had from other presidents in their first speech to Congress.
And as we noted,
And Amtrak ridership has been, at best, stagnant.
Russia, by implication, was involved. So you'd think they'd want to examine Rudy Giuliani's own copy of Hunter Biden's laptop. Why? Because Hunter Biden himself just told us on television that that laptop, that hard drive, could be tied directly to Russian intelligence. You know, the fake Russian laptop with all the photoshopped pictures of Hunter Biden smoking fake Russian crack with those.
Times was first to report that federal investigators at 6 a.m. today executed search warrants at Rudy Giuliani's Manhattan apartment and his office. Agents seized Mr. Giuliani's electronic devices. One source close to Mr. Giuliani tells NBC News that those devices included a mobile phone, a laptop, and an iPad. The investigation reportedly revolves around Mr. Giuliani's dealings in Ukraine. You will recall that before he was peddling conspiracy theories about the November election being stolen, he was peddling conspiracy theories about Joe Biden and the Biden family and supposedly nefarious dealings in the nation of Ukraine. Donald Trump, of course, was impeached for pressuring Ukraine's president to announce an investigation into the made-up Biden scandals that Giuliani was promoting. At least two of the people Giuliani worked with on his efforts to manufacture Biden-related scandals have since been sanctioned by the U.S. government as foreign agents working on behalf of Russia. Another of Giuliani's sources for his Get Biden project was a Ukrainian oligarch named Dmitry Firtash, who's wanted in the U.S. on a multiple-count felony indictment for bribery and corruption charges. One American lawyer and Fox News pundit, a lawyer named Victoria Tensing, who represented Mr. Firtash at the time, was also reportedly served with a search warrant this morning. She also briefly appeared as one of the cast of characters pushing the fantasy after the election that Trump actually won and Biden lost and it was all somehow stolen. I should mention that Mr. Giuliani's lawyer released a lengthy, rambling news statement this evening saying this is all a travesty and a hoax, and also, what about the Biden crime family? And what about Hillary Clinton? Indeed, what about Hillary Clinton? Seriously, what about Hillary Clinton? Joining us now is Andrew Weissman, who was a senior member of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigative team. He was also former general counsel of the FBI. Also joining us tonight is Kate Benner, Justice Department reporter for the New York Times. Katie and Andrew, it's nice to see both of you. Thanks for both being here. Andrew, let me start with you. The execution of the search warrants today at Mr. Giuliani's home and business A lot of observers are telling us that an overt act like that, which is not something you're trying to hide from the person who's the subject of these warrants, can sometimes tell you at what stage the investigation is. Is it fair to read into those actions today by FBI agents in terms of telling us where we are in the investigation?
Yes and no, Rachel. The yes is in order to have the authority to do what happened today, a court had to find that there was probable cause to believe that there was evidence on those devices of a crime. So that means that they're certainly further than just issuing a grand jury subpoena, for which you don't need to make any showing at all other than relevance. But it's also important to know that there really is no way for the government to get this data other than through a search warrant. In other words, if you issued a subpoena to a target like Rudy Giuliani, or we would have done as a special counsel to somebody like Paul Manafort, they are extremely likely to assert the Fifth Amendment and to not voluntarily produce incriminating evidence. And of course, that's everyone's right in America to do that. So this is a relatively routine way to get evidence when you believe it's in the hands of somebody who is the real target and subject of the investigation.
And Katie, let me ask you, from your reporting on the Justice Department, let me just ask if you can talk to us all about the timing of these raids. I mean, it is 4 months ago that we first reported on what was then a months-old story, that when we learned that SDNY prosecutors were seeking this search warrant on Mr. Giuliani, he, because of public reporting, has known for a long time that this was coming. There has been further reporting that Justice Department appointees from President Trump blocked these warrants from being executed. What do we know about the timing here? Why this happened today?
Sure, what we know is that at least twice prosecutors in Manhattan wanted to execute a search warrant on Rudy Giuliani, and at least twice they were rebuffed. Both times, officials under the Trump administration cited the idea of the election and that it could sway the election, both before November, when they wanted to execute a search warrant and they were told, listen, doing so would really impact the election, it could sway voters, and it could create a portrait that's very damning for Donald Trump as he runs for office. And then even after the election, officials continue to say, because this election is still being argued, because the president is still arguing that he may have won, and Rudy Giuliani is the lawyer behind that effort, he still cannot act. So we saw, for reasons that people inside of the Justice Department and the previous administration continue to claim are very credible, we saw that action stymied. I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing a very aggressive prosecutor's office finally unleashed, able to do what it would like to do, what it's wanted to do, that also feels that it's necessary in part because of what you say, that Giuliani has known about this investigation, and they're not convinced that evidence that exists in his possession will just continue to stick around forever.
Andrew Weissman, two questions for you. One, what exactly are they looking for to prove guilt in a FARA, which is basically a foreign agent investigation? And what if some of that evidence leads them to Donald Trump?
Great question. So the statute is, the Foreign Agents Registration Act is enacted so that the American public knows whether foreign government or foreign principals, it doesn't have to be a state actor overseas, if any foreigner is trying to lobby people in the United States or is seeking to influence public opinion. So this is actually a relatively easy investigation. What you want to find out is who were Rudy Giuliani's clients? Were any of them foreign principals, either state actors or not state actors? And you can look at telephone records, you can follow the money. I assume that is why they are looking at Victoria Tempsing, because she had a foreign client who reportedly was retained at the behest of Rudy Giuliani. And then you're going to look to see what it is that Rudy Giuliani did in the United States. One of the more interesting aspects of this investigation would be, who did Rudy Giuliani meet with in the Trump administration, either in person or on the phone, to importune, and that, if he was doing it for a foreign principal, is a crime, because he did not report it to the Department of Justice, which is what is required. And that is all some of the crimes that Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, Flynn were all charged with.
A question to that very point.
Femiclear, joie de hoo-ha, and new Femiclear for herpes symptoms is
So all that remains is the stigma. The remarkable thing is, and we're almost getting tired of these contrasts, but here's the most vivid. There is apparently material on Hunter Biden's laptop that suggests Hunter Biden was involved in the sexual abuse of minors.
Related to Joe Biden. He named Joe DeGeneva, he named Victoria Tensing, and he named Donald Trump. So I wonder how broad either of you think that this witness list might go, and whether or not, to that very point, any of those people should be concerned about becoming targets of this investigation too, or right up into Donald Trump.
Well, I'll start off to say Rudy Giuliani has said publicly that he couldn't have committed FARA because his ultimate client was the former president. If it was to be proved that his only client, and he was only doing this for the former president, that would not be a Foreign Agents Registration Act problem because the client would be an American, not a foreigner. But I suspect that the reason that a judge signed the search warrant is because there is at least probable cause to believe that Rudy Giuliani had foreign clients in Ukraine, possibly elsewhere, that he was acting for. And if that's the case, then I think that people like Donald Trump and many other people in administration who met with Rudy Giuliani are going to be potential witnesses as to what it is that Rudy Giuliani was asking for.
Katie, let me also ask you about sort of the process here. The response from sort of Team Giuliani today has been to deride this as a politicized act, as some sort of act of revenge or partisan score settling by the Biden administration. Obviously, those kinds of charges feel different now after 4 years of the Trump administration, in which those questions about how the Justice Department was running under President Trump were very much live wires. Ed Weisman wrote a fascinating book on the subject, to which I commend all of our viewers. It's I think, not going without notice that this is a week after Lisa Monaco has been sworn in as the new Deputy Attorney General. I mean, how much does the change in administration make a difference as to the actions of the independent Justice Department on a case like this?
Sure, I think that the change in administration, it is fair to say, would have an impact, in that the prosecutors would feel that they no longer have pressure from Washington not to take investigative steps into Rudy Giuliani. It's interesting that Giuliani's lawyer talked about the politicization of this investigation, and he said it to infer that the Biden administration was politicizing it. But we know from our reporting this is a 2-year-old investigation, that the bulk of the investigation actually happened while Donald Trump was president. And there were political pressures, but the political pressures seemed to be to slow the investigation, which had the effect of not killing it, pushing it forward into a new administration.
States based on a hunch. You have to have specificity. You've got to be able to say that, look, I have probable cause to believe that a crime has occurred. I can point to the crime that has occurred, and I can tell you I'm going to find evidence of that crime at the place I'm going to search. So they're going to ask about electronic devices, documents, and I suspect that they have some clarity about what they're actually looking for. You can't just go to a judge and say, hey, I want a fishing license. A warrant is very particular. It is very specific, and it has to be because it's trampling on civil liberties if it's not.
You know, John, this is what the latest in a rather bizarre turn for Rudy Giuliani. He's had a series of bizarre turns in recent years.
A man who came to national fame as a law and order mayor. He was a law and order prosecutor before that. He was America's mayor after 9/11, but he will be known for the last 4 or 5 years, which is as Donald Trump's personal lawyer and as part of a circle of people around Donald Trump who, frankly, have created a giant ethical stain on that administration. Now, Laura is dead right. You cannot get a search warrant to search an attorney's office. It's an incredibly high bar. It's not just probable cause. It's like, really? Do it. And so this also is a test for the Biden Justice Department. You know, Joe Biden does not like rearview mirror recrimination investigations of political enemies. However, clearly here, and we'll hear from the Attorney General in time, this is all sealed right now, clearly the prosecutor in New York case. We have a strong case. This is worth doing. And so it's a huge stain on Mr. Giuliani, presumed innocent. We'll see how the case goes. But it also comes at a moment of choice for Republicans. This is a giant debate in the Republican Party. How much Trumpism do we keep? With Trump comes this crowd. And the Republicans have a giant choice to make.
The former president does not want to go away. Rudy Giuliani comes with him. And so this coming at this moment, I think, really focalizes the conversations Republicans have to have with themselves about who are we going forward.
And one thing I was so touched by today, just after 4 years of covering the Trump administration and seeing how they reacted to certain DOJ investigations, was their non-reaction to this raid today. This is the second time a personal attorney to Donald Trump has had their home and office raided. Of course, Michael Cohen being the first, and now we've got Rudy Giuliani. But you did not see gloating from the White House. You did not see any of that behavior that we saw for so many years from Trump and from his acolytes. And instead, when you were speaking with Cedric Richmond, a senior advisor to President Biden earlier tonight, he said this is why people wanted Joe Biden to be in office. They didn't want him to interfere with the Justice Department. They didn't want him to be involved. They said, so we're not going to comment on that. And of course, we are also told the White House did not get a heads up that this raid was going down before it happened. And so you're just seeing that return to normalcy. And I do think that's another good point, that while this is something that the White House is not getting involved with, they do say, hey, this really shows the point of what we were trying to make all throughout the campaign and what we've been trying to show throughout since we've been in office, which is this is why people put Joe Biden in office and not re-elect Trump.
And remember what it reminds the American people of. I mean, the idea is about what this investigation for Rudy Giuliani is about. It was the essence of the first impeachment trial, of President Trump. And so it has a clear demarcation between these two different administrations. And it also talks about transparency. Because remember, Giuliani is being investigated in part, we understanding, based on his failure to register as a foreign agent on behalf of another nation. The ideas of loyalty, the ideas of to whom you serve, the ideas of whether or not you're going to be transparent, and about serving these two sort of masters is very part and parcel to everything we're talking about. And so you have the Justice Department, and make no mistake about it, you don't get a warrant against Rudy Giuliani without Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, being aware of it. You don't get it without the SDNY having run it up the chain in anticipation of political optics, and yet and still, you did not have any pushback in the form of shutting it down. It's quizzical to think to yourself, is it because there are fresh eyes on this particular case, or was there fresh information now that led this new Justice Department to decide that whatever was investigated up to 2 or 3 years ago was now worthy of having a warrant? That is the question I'm still waiting to answer.
John, let's think of
for the president's version that he saw last is not the one that's at the podium. So once the president sees it, no one else can change it.
Most of it has been issued, have been allocated to projects that have done the funding.
Tomorrow morning. That means 2 episodes available at foxnation.com. This one is called Green Energy Scams, and the focus of it is on the decimation of the last great standing forest on the east coast of the United States, the Great North Woods of Maine. Here's a preview of it.
Maine is such a beautiful place, has such special characteristics. The fresh air, the forest, the fish, the deer. And look at what we're about to do, is destroy that. This corridor is going to cut right through that habitat and destroy it.
This is it. There is no place like this on the East Coast anymore.
What we're up against in the state is some corporate corruption and political corruption.
Trees are one of the greatest sequesters of carbon we have.
Heavy equipment, bulldozers, everything's going to be sedated.
If we don't stop this thing, the whole state of Maine will become an ugly place.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
They care about the environment so much. Why are they destroying it? Well, that's the second episode of our documentary series. It's on foxnation.com as of tomorrow morning.
Working on an ambitious plan to, by 2035, turn LA wastewater into LA's drinking water. LA already has a pilot program where they're making this water. They sent me and you both these samples a few days ago from my shower or toilet or my backyard, who really knows. I'd like to offer a toast to you, Chris, to a sustainable future if you're down to try it.
Yeah, let's give it a nice bouquet.
Cheers, my friend.
Live picture of the White House around back on the south lawn, just outside the south portico. The motorcade has formed, which will be taking the president down to the Hill. Tonight has been declared a national security event, which just adds another layer of security, but something they are used to for these events. There are elements of the motorcade snake through there. The National Guard and the fencing remains at the U.S. Capitol. Also, in keeping with custom, the White House has strategically released portions of the president's address in advance. President Biden is expected tonight to make a direct appeal to the American people, to sell them on his massive infrastructure proposal. Again, here is an advanced look at language in part of the speech that the president will use to highlight the millions of jobs his infrastructure plan, in his view, would create. He's going to say, quote, "I know some of you at home wonder whether these jobs are for you. You feel left behind and forgotten in an economy that's rapidly changing. Let me speak directly to you. Independent experts estimate the American Jobs Plan will add millions of jobs and trillions of dollars in economic growth for years to come. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America." Indeed, there's another portion where the president's going to say, the middle class build our country, unions build the middle class. So going deep, going old school, back to his roots. Rachel standing by with a special guest.
Indeed. Joining us now is the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Mr. Pete Buttigieg. Secretary Buttigieg, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Same here. Good to be with you.
How do you like being Transportation Secretary? How is life in Washington?
I love it. It's an interesting job in any season, but right now, when we're on the cusp of what might be the most transformative thing that's happened in transportation in my lifetime, it's, of course, we got a lot of work to do to get from here to there, but I'm thrilled to be working on these issues and really honored to be part of this cabinet. It's just an incredible team.
In terms of those transformative proposals, one of the things that we've noticed in these first 100 days is that you've emerged as one of the administration's most articulate advocates for the president's plans, especially when it comes to somewhat hostile audiences. And so I have to ask if all the conversations you have been having with Republicans and with the folks at Fox News and other entities like that, have they taught you anything about this emerging political reality where Republican voters seem to like what President Biden is doing and what he's doing, even while Republican members of Congress, Republican senators won't go along with any of it?
Yeah, you're putting your finger on, I think, the defining dynamic of the moment, at least when it comes to domestic policy, which is we have policies that have such extraordinary, strong bipartisan support out among the American people, but just because that's true doesn't mean it's reflected here in Washington. And that's where I'm trying to earn my paycheck, engaging with both sides of the aisle, reminding them that this is not one of those moments when we're asking them, as administrations sometimes do, to vote for something that's unpopular that the American people don't understand or want. This is something that is popular, and it's popular for the very good reason that it's going to create millions of jobs. And as the president will remind Americans tonight, those jobs that are available, whether you've got a college degree or not, the plan revolves around infrastructure. Fundamentally, it's a jobs plan. And coupled with the families plan that the president's rolling out tonight, we're asking Congress to support something the American people have a long known we need to do.
Not apologizing for that delay. In fact, it was by design. A senior White House official tells me the pandemic has given the administration some running room, in their words. And this is what they mean by that. It's created a bit of a political opportunity, they hope. So now the president will be addressing the nation on the eve of his 100th day in office with some accomplishments under his belt, trying to use that momentum to go forward to what the White House realizes is going to be even more difficult second 100 days and beyond. They are using this to present his economic agenda, but it is the opportunity they believe the pandemic creates that allows him really to make this argument that this is the time to reshape the American economy. This is one example. He'll be talking about using broadband and spending millions and millions to expand broadband across the country as part of the infrastructure bill. The White House believes they're coming after a year of people working from home, realizing that their broadband is indeed infrastructure, as important as a gas line, water line. So look for the president tonight, I'm told, to use very specific examples. Now, yes, he's going to talk about how to pay for these plans, but he's also targeting some of those voters in the middle who voted for him, and they may have voted for President Trump last time, but they're the working class. A variety of messages tonight, but it is one of opportunity that this White House believes it's time to seize now. That's why he is going big. Jake.
All right, Jeff Zeleny at the White House. Thanks so much. Let's throw it right back to Anderson. Thanks very much. Ben, how much does a speech like this actually matter? I mean, obviously we give it a lot of coverage, we talk about it a lot, but a week from now.
But I think it matters for the Democrats. Look, I think people, particularly progressive, we underestimated Joe Biden. We're like, you think Joe Biden, he's just going to, maybe be slightly better than Trump. He's going to maybe walk away from Trump, be nicer than Trump. He is chasing FDR. Joe Biden is swinging for the fences. This is you look at this speech, this is a once-in-a-century opportunity to set the American system. You're talking about a free community college. You're talking about child care. You're talking about family leave. You're talking about the family economics that are on display here will change people's lives in a real way. So I think nobody's really put it all together yet. This is kind of the big reveal. You put all this stuff together. You got the deferred maintenance taken care of for how it can work for more people. I think it's a big deal.
Evan, you wrote the book on Joe Biden. Are you surprised by the direction he's moved?
Well, I think he feels that this moment calls, as Van said, for something larger than an ordinary set of policy items. In his inauguration address 99 days ago, he mentioned the word democracy more than any inauguration address in history. And that was not only because we were just 2 weeks after the insurrection at the Capitol. It's because he really sees that there is the risk that Americans don't believe that democracy can deliver for them, that they'll become more alienated. And it's not just in the eyes of Americans. Tonight he's also talking to the world. He's making a case, in effect, for the idea that democracy can still function and we can still find ways to solve our problems.
And I mean, where does he go from, how does he sell this beyond time?
Well, I think that he can rely on the grassroots. There's been a maturation on the progressive left. First of all, Biden learned from Obama and Biden, don't wait around too long for Republicans. They'll take your time, they won't give you any votes. So I think there's a maturation there. But the grassroots has not demobilized. Ordinarily after the election, you're notorious for going to sleep. That hasn't happened. So you got, the Care Can't Wait coalition has brought together all these people fighting for these policies. They're still pushing ahead. He doesn't have to fight by himself now. He's got a grassroots with him as a governing partner.
Yeah, but the issue is not really rallying the base. The issue is he's got a 50-50 Senate, a very narrow majority in the House. He's got conservative, moderate senators among those in the Senate. He's got some suburban Democrats in the House who are going to be concerned about taxes. So landing it in such a way that he can command even his own base in these two chambers of Congress is going to be a complicated...
Plus he knows he's not going to get everything. So he wants to put it out there and say, this is what I believe. That's what it's about.
And then we're going to get our first look at the unusual setup inside the House chamber of tonight's address. The President speaking after the top of the hour, covering it all. Be right back.
We're Carvana, the company who invented car vending machines and buying a car 100% online. Now we've created a brand new way for you to sell your car. Whether it's a year old or a few years old, we want to buy your car. So go to Carvana and enter your license plate, answer the questions, and our Echo Wizardry calculates your car's value and gives you a real offer in seconds. When you're ready, we'll come to you, pay you on the spot, and pick up your car. That's it. So ditch the old way of selling your car and say hello to the new way at Carvana.
Tonight, I'll be eating a pork banh mi with extra jalapenos. Thanks, baby. Yeah, we about to get spicy for this virtual day. Spicy like them pajama pants. Hey, the camera is staying up here. This is not the second day. So hot.
Hi. I'm Tamara. Sweaty sleepers aren't too crazy about me. Casper. It's a Casper snow mattress. A new cool option from Casper.
There's no more struggling to fill your lungs, no more mandatory suffocation, just deep, satisfying breaths, as many as you want.
Of American infrastructure. What I mean by that is all great moments in big choices and era-defining decisions about infrastructure here, from the Erie Canal to the Transcontinental Railroad to the interstate highway system. Part of that great tradition was actually that each one of those decisions expanded the traditional vision of what infrastructure is. We're living in a time where being connected to the internet is just as important as being connected to the interstate highway system. You need both. And after years and years of talk, the president's laying out a way to actually live it.
U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Secretary, really appreciate you being here on this big night. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's interesting to see, obviously we're looking at the shot here in terms of the motorcade and the
the drive from the White House over the Capitol. But I will say, just before I hand it back to Brian, it is interesting talking to a cabinet secretary tonight with his normal Zoom background. And it's because it's just the Secretary of Defense who are there. All the rest of them are watching from home. No designated survivor tonight, as Brian was saying earlier. Brian.
Indeed, Rachel, Mark Milley is going to be the one general among the Joint Chiefs, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, to represent all of them. An explanation as to why this shot has so much video breakup. This is from the moving van that has the pool television camera. They're about to clear the exit of the White House grounds, which Nicole Wallace can confirm is 18 acres, and then take a right and go along the most heavily traveled motorcade route in the United States. I am told Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, is at the dais in the House chamber. She will be gaveling what is a limited House session into order so they can, in effect, receive the president. We are under 30 minutes until the start time. Motorcade is a quick drive across town. We will be back to show you the president's arrival on Capitol Hill as our live coverage continues.
Welcome to Stormy Heights, where the windows are always Pella. Pella's fiberglass is the strongest material for windows and heavy doors. The fiberglass frame is even scratch and dent resistant. Pella windows, tested for extremes, designed for your home.
Like many people with moderate to severe ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, I was there. Be right back. But my symptoms were keeping me from where I needed to be. So I talked to my doctor and learned Humira is for people who have UC or Crohn's disease. And Humira helps people achieve remission that can last, so you can experience few or no symptoms.
Humira can lower your ability to fight infections. Serious and sometimes fatal infections, including tuberculosis and cancers, including lymphoma, have happened, as have blood, liver, and nervous system problems, serious allergic reactions, and new or worsening heart failure. Tell your doctor if you've been to areas where certain fungal infections are common, and if you've had TB, hepatitis B, are prone to infection, have flu-like symptoms or sores. Don't start Humira if you have an infection.
Be there for you and them. Ask your gastroenterologist about Humira. With Humira, remission is possible.
Our Confident Forever plan is possible with a CFP professional.
The proposal to raise tax on capital gains, he said it would be a, quote, heavy lift. He said his concern is that the economy is about to take off. He's concerned we put the brakes on that. Also was trying to put the brakes on efforts by Democrats to try to essentially cut out Republicans because of concerns that Republicans aren't going as far as they are, and to try to essentially prevent them from using a process that would allow Democrats to pass the Biden agenda on just Democratic votes alone. He's saying continue to work with the Republicans, exhaust all options before we go this other route. And that is a very important signal because Joe Biden, the Democrats, need Joe Manchin's vote in order to advance anything to the scale of which Joe Biden is holding here. So they're going to have to listen. The president, Democratic leaders are going to have to listen here to one of the most important voices who's raising some concerns about this proposal.
Right now, viewers are looking at images from National Statuary Hall, and you saw perhaps Vice President Kamala Harris along with her Senate escort. She was more to the front of the line. These are United States senators walking in, masked, as is required by the tradition of the House, who is setting the rules this evening. And, you know, as we prepare to hear from President Biden, you see these groups walking in, Democrats and Republicans. They're mainly sticking with their own party. In the past, has been a tradition. There's Speaker Nancy Pelosi. It is her chamber. She will be presiding, and she will be sitting behind President Biden. It will be the first time in American history that two women are on that dais, Speaker Pelosi and, of course, Vice President Harris.
And the image we saw before, well, let's just actually talk about this moment.
So here is Vice President Harris. Let's listen.
This is going to be a moment that we're about to see. Vice President, a female, walking up next to the female Speaker of the House. Look at that moment.
A little bit of a non-COVID
handshake, but
We were told
that
that
an
they
elbow
were not
bump.
supposed to do that, but I think it's going to be difficult for a bunch of glad-handling politicians to not gladly handle each other's hands and elbows.
And especially for both of them, right? Dana, I mean, for Nancy Pelosi, who's been in Congress for so long.
The first and only speaker
The
of the
first and
House.
only female speaker. I mean,
Right, female Speaker of the House, but the first and only female president.
And as we look at those images, I was up on Capitol Hill in the speaker's conference room today with a couple of few reporters, and she was talking about this very moment, talking about how important it's going to be for her, for girls, for everybody across the country to see those images. She also said, guys, that the phone was ringing off the hook, that people were calling from all around the globe because they were excited to see that imagery. She also, of course, mentioned that the two of them are from California, not just from California, but the Bay Area. She said, must be something in the water.
And I...
Is he going to do a session with Trump?
Anthony, how are you, man? Doing great.
Okay, so those are your... Okay, very warm.
Kevin?
Electricity he would use, et cetera, et cetera. She's explicit. She does not worry about more children in other faraway poor countries. That's fine. Our country are the problem. Sean Duffy is a former member of Congress and quite a prolific father. We're impressed by that, and he joins us tonight. So, Sean, thanks so much for coming on. I guess what I'm so struck by is how they have racialized the environment. Like, what does the color of the kid have to do with his effect on the environment? Why pollute something as inherently decent as wanting to save the environment with their creepy, evil race politics?
Congress tonight, at least on the House side, we are still trying to figure out more details about what happened with the senators who came in here. But members of the House were required to go through magnetometers to come onto the floor tonight to view this speech. And that's, of course, in line with new rules to get onto the House floor in the first place, if you're a member of the House, that were put in place after the January 6th insurrection. But it's never been part of the process before. There has never been this line of thinking that perhaps a member of Congress could be a threat to the U.S. president. That is really a very stunning reality. And of course, guests have always been screened. Every time I've come in, this is my fourth president I've seen one of these addresses for, and I've been here in the chamber for at least 6 of these types of speeches. Guests, reporters always go through magnetometers. Anyone who the public is invited to attend typically would be screened, but never before were members of Congress screened. So like I said, we're still trying to figure out what the process was for senators. They in many ways do things their own way. But we've now entered this very strange period where people are milling around, sort of waiting to see what happens next. Normally, this room would be full. You would see cabinet secretaries, the Supreme Court justices. I mean, we'll see that the cabinet, of course, what the members that are going to attend is sorted here in a minute. But it's fascinating how you can really see individual interactions on the floor in a way that you can't under different circumstances. I watched Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of Michigan, who, of course, often is with our viewers on MSNBC. She crossed all the way across the floor, which is a relatively rare thing in these circumstances, especially considering how divided we are. And she spoke first to Lauren Boebert, who is, of course, the congresswoman from Colorado, who has been at the center of some of these controversies around security. And then she went over and she had a pretty extended conversation with Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who actually does have one of those seats right on the aisle, or as close to the aisle as you can be. The aisle seats are actually 3 seats off the aisle this time. But she may be able to get an elbow bump with President Biden when he walks down the aisle, if that's what he decides to stop for. Now, I saw Liz Cheney chatting with Congresswoman Dingell and with some others of her colleagues. She is 2 people away, it's about 7 seats, 2 people away from Leader Kevin McCarthy, who is seated at the table. The 2 of them, I have not seen them speak since they walked in here. Now, it's entirely possible I have missed something, but I've been trying to keep a really close eye on the 2 of them.
Over the wheel. Hey, don't spin the wheel yet.
They can get close to the president and the other dignitaries as they come down the aisle. Those are 3 seats away from the aisle, designed to try and prevent people from crowding that space as the president comes in. As you saw members of the Senate and the vice president come in, a lot of those protocols were quickly abandoned. And as I'm looking out on the floor right now, you know, we see a lot of members talking in very tight circles, handshakes, a lot of hugs, a lot of people happy to see each other. And we should point out, Jake, that, you know, while they're taking every possible precaution that they can to stop the spread of the coronavirus, the lion's share of people in this room have received vaccination. They're fully vaccinated. In addition to that, every single one of us that was allowed into this room ahead of time had to show either some proof of vaccination or that we had taken a negative COVID test within the last 48 hours. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, especially when the president himself comes in, because they're doing everything they possibly can to try and protect everybody in this room. But it's going to be difficult, especially given, you know, the magnitude of this particular event.
We just saw on the screen there the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Billy. Usually the Joint Chiefs are there, all of them, tonight, or at least all of them. Tonight, only one of them. Same thing with the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court. All 9 justices are invited. Tonight, it will just be one of justices, the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts. It's just in many ways this evening is very different from every previous joint session of Congress that you have ever seen before. Manu Raj on Capitol Hill for us. Tell us about the ways in which they're planning on getting President Biden into that chamber, given, and also, frankly, in security concerns. We're looking at what was the scene of a crime just 3.5 months ago with the January 6th insurrection.
Yeah, I remember House members had to go through security, come into the chamber. This is typically never really, members could usually blow past security, but they have to do that here. And when Joe Biden walks down that center aisle, this is going to be much different than what we have seen in years past in presidential addresses, in which in the past members crowd the aisle. They actually wait for hours and sit in that center aisle, just to try to shake the president's hand. This time they are forbidden from doing that. They're told they cannot line the aisle, they cannot make physical contact. Now, as you guys were saying, as we're seeing, and as Ryan was just reporting, that members are clearly not abiding by all those physical distancing requirements. So perhaps some may not listen to this, perhaps some may come up and give a fist bump or elbow bump, but they are not supposed to be doing that. So even the presidential entrance will be different. There will be an escort committee that will leave from the House and Senate. Members of both chambers will go through and escort the president into the body. But we'll see how the members do react. If any of them do approach them, they try to have lay down some restrictions here on their interactions with the president.
Joint session will come to order. The chair appoints as members of the committee on the part of the House to escort the President of the United States into the chamber. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer.
So
the gentleman from South
Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is reading just a kind of boilerplate that's done every time, just to describe what is about to happen in terms of the President coming in and the way in which they are supposed to convene. You know, well, the President had the anchors from various networks over to the White House today to talk about his speech, and most was off the record, but one thing that was on the record had to do with the way the President views this moment in time. And while I think a lot of people voted for Joe Biden thinking it was going to be the deal-making senator and vice president that they're familiar with, and I do think that his personal tendency is to make deals and cut deals, I also think is really torn between that persona.
The senator from Vermont, Mr. Nagy. The senator from Illinois, Mr. Durbin. The senator from Michigan, Ms. Stabenow. The senator from Vermont, Mr. Sanders. The senator from Minnesota, Ms. Klobuchar. The senator from Kentucky, Mr. McConnell. The senator from South Dakota, Mr. Thune. The senator from Wyoming, Mr. Barrasso. The senator from Iowa, Ms. Ernst. The senator from Missouri, Mr. Blunt. The senator from Florida, Mr. Scott.
The members of the escort committee will exit the chamber through the lobby doors, right and left of the speaker's podium.
gradually expand it, but we won't pack it like this. Now that I'm president, that's called leadership. And when he said I'm going to make those calls, I'd like to see him make a couple of those calls tonight.
If you want to unify the country, act on its behalf. I agree with you completely, and nicely explained. Professor, thank you.
Policies do reset it a little
His
bit.
policies poll higher than he does.
That's right, and that people will like what he's doing, still register disapproval, extreme disapproval because he's Joe Biden.
Can you fact check that for us, Steve, in terms of the polling for his policies versus polling for him personally? Do we have anything on that right now?
Yeah, and that's exactly the dynamic you're getting at there is exactly what you're seeing. Take a look at the stuff we're probably going to hear about tonight. For instance, this poll the past week here from Monmouth, the infrastructure plan for Biden, 68 support, 29% opposed. The paid college tuition, 64-34. Basically, all these questions. The pay for is here. Taxes on corporations, taxes on wealthy individuals, basically consistently 2-1. And in fact, if you look at what was the signature item of Biden's first 100 days, probably that stimulus. And when that stimulus, again, here's the Monmouth poll, it was basically close to a 2-1 support or opposed. But again, and I keep coming to that word polarization, don't mean to sound like a broken record, but you see when you look at the overall assessment of Biden as president, probably see, and this is true of politicians of both parties today, polarization will kick in, and maybe it counts for more than any individual issue.
But you can't get to a 62% support number with only Democrats. Right. You have to be bringing along some independents and some Republicans into a 62% positive number on, for example, the government bill.
And the thing that they spend the most time and effort on is the shots in arms, and that polls even higher.
Yeah.
Infrastructure or the total package, it highs polls close to 70%, 69-72 in the most recent polls.
You had on Tim Miller earlier, who I think was a brilliant, the bulwark. They talked about what Democrats should be doing. My initial thought, before I even started reading word of it, was, Biden seems like he diffuses people's rage. He's an older white guy. He's sort of what presidents used to look like, and it felt like he's diffusional. That's not what I hear in these polls, but I wonder if that means that Democrats have to do they have to divorce Biden from the Biden policies in order to sort of reset themselves in the midterm? Because I thought Biden was a net plus. It was just my assumption, because he is a diffuser of rage just in his bearing.
I will tell you, I'll hand it back over to Brian. Obviously, we haven't noted in this photo, these images are historic. They have two women there. And as a woman, Cole is from Northern California, to have Kamala Harris of Oakland and Nancy Pelosi of San Francisco there, it sort of hits you in the pride, hits you a little bit of a little East Bay pride.
And I'm sure you've all heard this in your own calls, and I think Kamala Harris just said, Vice President Harris just said this to someone, what do you think about this historic night? She said it should be normal.
Yes, that is their big picture, their big messages. This is just normal. This is just the way it should be.
Brian, back over to you.
How strange it's going to look when we grab tape of this event years from now. The mask wearing, the distance out of 200, just a scene like that. The president is in the building. He is in the holding room. We are going to see First Lady Jill Biden and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff get escorted into the guest gallery. We saw a shot just a bit ago of the door. Something to think about when we do see Joe Biden come down this aisle. Again, 36-year veteran of the Senate, but so far, because of the pandemic, and he's never used terms of victimization, he has been robbed of so much of the majesty and pomp of job, campaign stops, convention speech, after he won, giving his acceptance in a parking lot in Wilmington, an inaugural address before an empty mall in Washington, D.C. These are representatives of the diplomatic corps coming in. Again, it is vast. They are sparse, but that is the nature of what we're doing. And the parliamentary word for what you're watching is we're stalling until the top of the hour when the Speaker of the House will cue the Sergeant at Arms who will announce the President of the United States. Luckily for us, is Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff coming into the honored guest gallery. Luckily for us, we have former U.S. Senator from the great state of Missouri, Claire McCaskill, former chairman of the National Republican Party.
For long and short trips. It includes 2 suitcases.
Just go, she was my attorney general, and she was my senator. Now she's my vice president. And just like you saw Joe Biden sitting in the audience and then sitting in that vice president's chair and now giving that speech, Kamala Harris someday be standing that well. So I just want to put that. That's a big deal. Wolf, any moment now, we expect Lady Jill Biden to enter the chair.
Chief Justice of the United States, the Supreme Court, Chief Justice John Roberts, as well. John King, this is a historic moment for the country. It's also a very historic moment for the President of the United States.
It is a giant opportunity for the president. He's speaking here in Washington, but he's trying to speak to the country again. Well, Joe Biden first came to the Senate 48 years ago.
Madam Speaker, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Normally, all, and most, if not all, of the justices kind of would be there, but because of the pandemic, just the Chief Justice would be there today.
The chief representing the High Court tonight. Like Joe Biden was up to the Senate 48 years ago, first ran for president 34 years ago. Think of him as an old school politician. This is a very ambitious pro-government agenda he outlined tonight, and he is banking on the fact that he believes in the first 100 days he has proven. I told you I was going to turn around the vaccine rollout in the COVID fight. I did it. The United States was the laughingstock in the COVID fight under Trump. It is the envy of the world now in the vaccination rollout. He is going to say it is the government that helped get the economy back on its feet. Trust me as I tried to do more. It's a tougher sell now. We're heading toward the midterm election year, but he is on very good ground here as he tries to, again, defy Washington conventional wisdom and say, I can tell this very ambitious plan to a country that he believes is much more open than Republicans in Washington believe.
Yep.
Listen, this is going to be
Samsung Galaxy S21.
chamber because of COVID. There's usually about 1,600. It's also historic as you watch Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, walk into the chamber. It's also historic because of the women who are standing behind the president tonight. For the first time in American history, 2 women stand behind the president on the House rostrum. Vice President Harris and Speaker Pelosi, as they honor the First Lady coming in. This is the succession, the line of succession. Number 1, Vice President Harris, and then Speaker Pelosi.
We saw the Vice President's husband, the first man, first gentleman, Douglas Emhoff, as he said, was seated up there. So it's not the typical sort of raucous handshaking, slap on the back, walk through for all of these people. It's definitely a more sedate affair, and we've seen this all throughout the campaign. For the campaign, there's crowds. Remember, we were, with the honking horns in the parking lot, and now we've got a very small audience for this address.
In fact, only 1 justice from the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, John Roberts, just walked in. Only 2 members of the cabinet, the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. So you see a much smaller crowd. In fact, lawmakers are spread out all over the chamber to provide seats. You'll see the markings on different seats where they can't see it.
You need to assign a designated survivor, since there are lots of people who are not in the chamber tonight, so that's a little bit unusual as well. And to look at the Vice President and the Speaker who greeted each other with an elbow bump when they came in tonight. Obviously, thanks to be 2.
Very jealous of them for that opportunity. And to remember, Brian, famously, the Supreme Court, some of them quit coming after Barack Obama confronted them about Citizens United during his State of the Union speech. And Alito famously nodding his head no when Barack Obama said exactly what was going to happen with that decision in terms of dark money flooding the airwaves during political campaigns.
Michael Steele, I wonder if there isn't some benefit, and I agree with you. I think this is a transitional moment. I think this is very fine. He's adhering to the tradition, and he's doing it in a safe way. I think it's like his campaign. The safety procedures almost become part of the message. But I wonder if he isn't also doing another end around the Republican hijinks and theatrics. I mean, they're literally not in the room.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks are taking note of that. The story earlier in the week where, it was about Democrats who were trying to get the tickets, and then the story was about the Republicans who didn't want it, and everybody kind of yawned. It's like, yeah, who cares if they're there or not? Really.
Foundation, and don't forget, kids say the darndest things.
He understands, maybe more than most of his predecessors, because he has been in the chamber so many times, the importance of it, but particularly because of where we are in this time, in this country. And again, because he feels that he has this very thin time to convince Americans that he should spend the money that he's talking about. He should raise the taxes in order to spend the money that he's talking about.
It's going to revive the economy. It's going to set us up for the next 20 or 30 years. It's going to call it a generational investment in children and in working Americans. It's going to be a tough sell for Republicans. They don't like how he wants to pay for it by rolling back the Trump tax cuts. And it could be even a little bit difficult for a few Democrats who want to know where exactly all that money is going and how it would be spent.
In the cabinet, and also pandemic changes and security changes as well.
That's right, Savannah, and I have to tell you, it is surreal to be here for this event. I'm standing up in the House gallery. It's where we normally cover these events from, but instead there's only a handful of reporters and so few people on the floor. The atmosphere feels almost casual. It's very strange. It's more like any normal day with a normal number of people who might be scattered around on the floor than it is like a huge ceremony like a joint address or a State of the Union. And what you can see on your screen, of course, is pandemic precautions. So,
it appears they're getting ready for General William Ward, the House Sergeant at Arms. His first time. Very good. But that. William Walker, the
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Good to be back. As Mr. Chuck will understand, it's good to be almost home. Down the hall. Anyway, well, Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words. And it's about time. About time. First Lady and her husband. Second Gentleman, Chief Justice, members of the United States Congress and Cabinet, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. While the setting tonight is familiar, this gathering is just a little bit different. A reminder of the extraordinary times we're in. Throughout our history, presidents have come to this chamber to speak to Congress, to the nation, and to the world, to declare war, to celebrate peace, to announce new plans and possibilities. Tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity, about rebuilding the nation, revitalizing our democracy, and winning the future for America. I stand here tonight, one day shy of the 100th day of my administration. 100 days since I took the oath of office, lifted my hand off our family Bible, inherited a nation, we all did, that was in crisis. Worst pandemic in a century. Worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Worst attack on democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. Peril into possibility, crisis to opportunity, setbacks into strength. We all know life can knock us down, but in America, we never, ever, ever stay down. Americans always get up. Today, that's what we're doing. America's rising anew, choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, and light over darkness. After 100 days of history renewal, America's ready for a takeoff tonight. We're working again, dreaming again, discovering again, and leading the world again. We have shown each other and the world that there's no quit in America. None. 100 days ago, America's house was on fire. We had to act. Thanks to the extraordinary leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, and the overwhelming support of the American people, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, we did act. Together we passed the American Rescue Plan, one of the most consequential rescue packages in American history. We're already seeing results. American history. We're already seeing the results. We're already seeing the results. After I promised we'd get 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots into people's arms in 100 days, we'll have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those 100 days. Thanks to all the help of all of you. We're marshaling your help, everyone's help. We're marshaling every federal resource. We've gotten vaccines to nearly 40,000 pharmacies and over 700 community health centers where the poorest of the poor can be reached. We're setting up community vaccination sites, developing mobile units to get to hard-to-reach communities. Today, 90% of Americans now live within 5 miles of a vaccination site. Everyone over the age of 16, everyone is now eligible to get vaccinated right now, right away. Go get vaccinated, America. Go and get the vaccination. They're available. When I was sworn in on January 20th, less than 1% of the seniors in America were fully vaccinated against COVID-19. 100 days later, 70% of seniors in America over 65 are protected, fully protected. Senior deaths from COVID-19 are down 80% since January. Down 80% because of all of you. And more than half of all adults in America have gotten at least one shot. Mass vaccination center in Glendale, Arizona. I asked the nurse, I said, what's it like? She looked at me, she said, it's like every shot is given a dose of hope, is her phrase, a dose of hope. A dose of hope for an educator in Florida was a child suffering from autoimmune disease. Wrote to me, said she's worried, and she was worried about bringing the virus home. She said she then got vaccinated at a large site in her car. She said she sat in her car when she got vaccinated and just cried. Cried out of joy and cried out of relief. Parents, seeing the smiles on the kids' faces for those who are able to go back to school because the teachers and the school bus drivers and the cafeteria workers are vaccinated. Grandparents, hugging the children and grandchildren instead of pressing hand no. Say goodbye. It means everything. Those things mean everything. You know, there's still, you all know it. You know it better than any group of Americans. There's still more work to do to beat this virus. We can't let our guard down. But tonight, I can say, because of you, the American people, our progress these past 100 days against one of the worst pandemics in history has been one of the greatest logistical achievements this country's ever seen. What else have we done in those first 100 days? We kept our commitment, Democrats and Republicans, of sending $1,400 rescue checks to 85% of American households. We've already sent more than 160 million checks out the door. It's making a difference. You'll know when you go home. For many people, it's making all the difference in the world. A single mom in Texas wrote me. She said she couldn't work. But she said the relief check put food on the table and saved her and her son from eviction from their apartment. A grandmother in Virginia who told me she immediately took her granddaughter to the eye doctor. Something she said she put off for months because she didn't have the money. One of the defining images, at least from my perspective, in this crisis has been cars lined up. Cars lined up for miles. And not people just barely able to start those cars, missed cars. Lined up for miles. Waiting for a box of food to be put in their trunk. I don't know about you, but I didn't ever think I'd see that in America. And all of this is through no fault of their own. No fault of their own, these people are in this position. That's why the rescue bank is delivering food and nutrition assistance to millions of Americans facing hunger. And hunger is down sharply already. We're also providing rental assistance. You all know this. American people, I want to make sure they understand. Keeping people from being evicted from their homes. Providing loans to small businesses to reopen and keep employees on the job. During these 100 days, an additional 800,000 Americans enrolled in the Affordable Care Act. And I established a special sign period to do that. 800,000 in that period. Critical investments to address the opioid crisis. Maybe most importantly, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, we're on track to cut child poverty in America in half this year. And in the process, while this is all going on, the economy created more than 1,300,000 new jobs in 100 days. More jobs in the first 100 days than any president on record. International Monetary Fund. Jobs in the first 100 days than any president on record. International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund is now estimating our economy will grow at a rate of more than 6% this year. That will be the fastest pace of economic growth in this country in nearly 4 decades. America's moving forward, but we can't stop now. We're in competition with China and other countries to win the 21st century. We're at a great inflection point in history. We have to do more than just build back better. We have to build back better. We have to compete more strenuously than we have. Throughout our history, think about it, public investment in infrastructure has literally transformed America. Our attitudes as well as our opportunities. The Transcontinental Railroad, the interstate highways, united two oceans, brought a totally new age of progress to the United States of America. Universal public schools and college aid opened wide the doors of opportunity. Scientific breakthroughs took us to the moon. Now we're on Mars, discovering vaccines, gave us the internet, and so much more. These are investments we made together as one country, and investments that only the government was in a position to make. Time and again, they propel us into the future. That's why I proposed the American Jobs Plan, a once-in-a-generation investment in America's health. This is the largest jobs plan since World War II. It creates jobs to upgrade our transportation infrastructure. Jobs modernizing our roads, bridges, highways. Jobs building ports and airports, rail cars, transit lines. It's clean water. And today, up to 10 million homes in America and more than 400,000 schools and child care centers have pipes with lead in them, including drinking water. A clear and present danger to our children's health. American Jobs Plan creates jobs replacing 100% of the nation's lead pipes and service line, so every American can drink clean water. With high-speed internet, including 35% of the rural America that still doesn't have it. This is going to help our kids and our businesses succeed in the 21st century economy. And I'm asking the Vice President to lead this effort, because I know it'll get done. Creates jobs, building a modern power grid. Our grids are vulnerable. Storms, hacks, catastrophic failure, with tight, tragic results, as we saw in Texas and elsewhere during winter storms. The American Jobs Plan will create jobs to lay thousands of miles of transmission line needed to build a resilient and fully clean grid. We can do that. Look. The American Jobs Plan will help millions of people get back to their jobs, back to their careers. 2 million women have dropped out of the workforce during this pandemic. 2 million. And too often because they couldn't get the care they needed to care for their child or care for an elderly parent who needs help. 800,000 families are on the Metro waiting list right now to get home care for their aging parent or loved one with disability. If you think it's not important, check out in your own district, Democrat or Republican. Democrat or Republican voters. The great concern, almost as much as the choice, is taking care of an elderly loved one who can't be left alone. Medicaid contemplated it, but this plan is going to help those families and create jobs for our caregivers with better wages and better benefits. Continue the cycle of growth. For too long, we failed to use the most important word when it comes to meeting the climate crisis. Jobs. 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 For me, when I think climate change, I think jobs. American Jobs Plan will put engineers and construction workers to work building energy-efficient buildings and homes. Electric workers, IBEW workers installing 500,000 charging stations along our highways. So we can own the electric car market. Farmers planting cover crops so they can reduce carbon dioxide they are getting paid for doing it. Look, think about it. There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. No reason. None. No reason. So folks, there's no reason why American workers can't lead the world in the production of electric vehicles and batteries. I mean, there's no reason. We have this capacity. We're the brightest 10 people in the world. American Jobs Plan is going to create millions of paying jobs, jobs Americans can raise a family on. As my dad would then say, with a little beaver. And all the investments in the American Jobs Plan will be guided by one principle. Buy American. Buy American. And I might note parenthetically, that does not violate any trade agreement. It's been the law since the 30s. Buy American. American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs. That's the way it's supposed to be, and it will be in this administration. I made it clear to all my cabinet people, their ability to give exemptions has been strenuously limited. It will be American products. Now I know you at home are wondering whether these jobs are for you. So many of you, so many of the folks that I grew up with, feel left behind, forgotten, and an economy is so rapidly changing. It's frightening. I want to speak directly to you, because you think about it. That's what people are most worried about. Can I fit in? Independent experts estimate the American Jobs Plan will add millions of jobs and trillions of dollars to economic growth in years to come. It is an 8-year program. These are good paying jobs that can't be outsourced. Nearly 90% of the infrastructure jobs created in the American Jobs Plan do not require a college degree. 75% don't require an associate's degree. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is. And it recognizes something I've always said, in this chamber and the other. The guys and women on Wall Street, Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. So that's my calling on Congress to pass the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, and send it to my desk so we can support the right to unionize. And by the way, I'm thinking about sending things to my desk. Let's raise the minimum wage to $15. No one working 40 hours a week, no one working 40 hours a week should live below the poverty line. We need to ensure greater equity and opportunity for women. And while we're doing this, let's get the Paycheck Fairness Act to my desk as well. Equal pay. It's been much too long. And if you wonder whether it's too long, look behind me. And finally, American Jobs Plan will be the biggest increase in non-defense research and development on record. We'll see more technological change, and some of you know more about this than I do. We'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50. That's how rapidly artificial intelligence and so much more is changing. And we're falling behind the competition with the rest of the world. Decades ago, we used to invest 2% of our gross domestic product in America. 2% of our gross domestic product in research and development. Today, Mr. Secretary, that's less than 1%. China and other countries are closing in fast. We have to develop and dominate the products and technologies of the future. Advanced batteries, biotechnology, computer chips, clean energy. The Secretary of Defense can tell you, and those of you who work in national security just know, the Defense Department has an agency called DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. The people who set up before I came here, and that's been a long time ago, to develop breakthroughs to enhance our national security. That's their only job. And it's a semi-separate agency. It's under the Defense Department. It's led to everything from the discovery of the internet to GPS and so much more that's enhanced our security. The National Institute of Health, the NIH, I believe, should create similar advanced research project agency for health. Without a singular purpose, develop breakthroughs to prevent, detect, and treat diseases like Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer. I'll still never forget when we passed a cancer proposal last year as Vice President. almost $9 million going to NIH. They've excused the point of personal privilege, and I forget you standing and saying, name and after my deceased son. It meant a lot. But so many of us, the deceased sons, daughters, relatives, died of cancer. I think no more worthy investment. I know of nothing that is more bipartisan. So let's end cancer as we know. It's within our power. It's within our power to do it. Investments in jobs and infrastructure, like the ones we're talking about, have often had bipartisan support in the past. Vice President Harris and I met regularly in the Oval Office with Democrats and Republicans and discussed the jobs plan. And I applaud a group of Republican senators who just put forward their own proposal. So let's get to work. I wanted to lay out before Congress my plan before we got into the deep discussions. I'd like to meet with those who have ideas that are different, they think are better. I welcome those ideas. But the rest of the world is not waiting for us. I just want to be clear. From my perspective, doing nothing is not an option. Look, we can't be so busy competing with one another that we forget the competition that we have the rest of the world in the 21st century. Secretary Blinken, I spent a lot of time with President Xi. Traveled over 17,000 miles with him. They tell me over 24 hours of private discussions with him. He called to congratulate me with a 2-hour discussion. He's deadly earnest of becoming the most significant consequential nation in the world. He and others, autocrats, think that democracy can't compete in the 21st century with hypocrisies. It takes too long to get consensus. To win that competition for the future, in my view, we also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children. That's why I've introduced the American Family Plan tonight, which addresses 4 of the biggest challenges facing American families and in turn America. First is access to good education. This nation made 12 years of public education universal in the last century. It made us the best educated, best prepared nation in the world. It's, I believe, the overwhelming reason that propelled us to where we got in the 21st and 20th century. The world's caught up, we're catching up. They're not waiting. I would say parenthetically, if we were sitting down, we've set a bipartisan committee together and said, okay, we're going to decide what we do in terms of government providing for free education. I wonder whether we think, as we did in the 20th century, that 12 years is enough in the 21st century. I doubt it. 12 years is no longer enough today to compete with the rest of the world in the 21st century. That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America, starting as early as we can. The great universities in this country have conducted studies over the last 10 years. It shows that adding 2 years of universal high-quality preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old, no matter what background they come from, puts them in a position to be able to compete all the way through 12 years. It increases exponentially their prospect of graduating, going on beyond graduation. The research shows when a young child goes to school, not daycare, they're far more likely to graduate from high school and go to college, something after high school. When you add 2 years of free community college on top of that, you begin to change the dynamic. We do that. Best in historical black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, already serving institutions. The reason is they don't have the endowments. The students are just as capable of learning about cybersecurity, just as capable of learning about metallurgy, all the things that are going on to provide those jobs in the future. Was a community college professor who teaches today as First Lady. She's long said, once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Joe, any country that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. Should be deeply involved in leading this effort. Thank you, Joe. Second thing, we need American Family Plan will provide access to quality, affordable child care. We guarantee 7% of their income for high-quality care for children up to the age 5. The most hard-pressed working families won't have to spend a dime. Third, the American Family Plan will finally provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave and medical leave family members. We're one of the industrial countries of the world. No one got to choose between a job and a paycheck or taking care of themselves and their loved ones, parents, spouse, or child. And fourth, the American Family Plan puts directly into the pockets of millions of Americans. In March, we expanded the tax credit for every child in the family, up to $3,000 per child if they're under 6 years of age. Over 6 years of age. And $2,600 for children over 6 years of age. With 2 parents, 2 kids, that's $7,200 in the pocket to help take care of your family. And that will help more than 65 million children and help cut child care poverty in half. We can afford it. 5 million children and help cut child care poverty in half. We can afford it. So we did that in the last piece of legislation we passed. Let's extend that child care credit at least the end of 2025. The American Rescue Plan lowered health care premiums for 9 million Americans with coverage under the Affordable Care Act. I know that's really popular on this side of the aisle. But let's make that provision permanent so the premiums don't go back up. In addition to my family's plan, I'm going to work with Congress to address this year other critical priorities for American families. The Affordable Care Act has been a lifeline for millions of Americans, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, protecting women's health, and the pandemic has demonstrated how badly needed. Let's lower deductibles for working families, Affordable Care and Affordable Care Act. And let's lower prescription drug costs. You know how to do this. Right here in America. Doing 3 times the same drug, 3 times what other countries pay. We have to change that, and we can. That's what we talked about all the years I was down here in this body, in Congress. Let's give Medicare the power to save hundreds of billions by negotiating lower drug prescription prices. And by the way, it won't just help people on Medicare. Lower prescription drug costs for everyone. And the money we save, which is billions of dollars, can go to strengthen the Affordable Care Act and expand Medicare coverage benefits without costing taxpayers an additional penny. It's within our power to do it. Let's do it now. We've talked about it long enough. Democrats and Republicans, let's get it done this year. This is all about a simple premise. Health care should be a right, not a privilege in America. So, how do we pay for my jobs and family? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficit. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not oppose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America, the wealthiest 1% of Americans, to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share. Sometimes I have arguments with my friends in the Democratic Party. I think you should be able to become a billionaire and a millionaire, but pay your fair share. Research shows that 55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid 0 federal tax last year. Those 55 corporations made in excess of $40 billion in profit. A lot of companies also paid taxes through tax havens in Switzerland and Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. And they benefit from tax loopholes and deductions for offshoring jobs and shifting profits overseas. It's not right. We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for the public investments their businesses will benefit from as well. Businesses will benefit from as well. We're going to reward work, not just wealth. We take top tax bracket for the wealthiest 1% of Americans, those making over $400,000 or more, back up to where it was when George W. Bush was president, when he started, 39.6%. That's where it was when George W. was president. We're going to get rid of the loopholes, allow Americans to make more than $1 million a year and pay a lower tax rate on their capital gains than Americans who with a paycheck. We're only going to affect 0.3% of Americans by that act, 0.3%. And the IRS is going to crack down on millionaires and billionaires who cheat on their taxes. It's estimated to be billions of dollars. I think thanks to the left, right, and center. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but I will not add a tax burden, additional tax burden to the middle class in this country. They're already paying enough. I believe what I propose is fair, fiscally responsible, and it raises revenue to pay the plans I propose and will create millions of jobs that will grow the economy and enhance our financial standing in the country. And say they don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% or corporate America. Ask them whose taxes you want to raise. Instead, who's they going to cut? Look, big tax cut in 2017. Remember, it was supposed to pay for itself. That was how it was sold. And generate vast economic growth. Instead, added $2 trillion of deficit. It was a huge windfall for corporate America, and those very top. Instead of using the tax savings to raise wages and invest in research and development, it poured billions of dollars into the pockets of CEOs. In fact, the pay gap between CEOs and their workers is now one of the largest in history. According to one study, CEOs make 320 times what the average worker in a corporation makes. It used to be in below 100. Pandemic is only made worse. 20 million Americans lost their job in the pandemic, working in middle-class America. At the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than $1 billion in the same exact period. Let me say it again. 650 people increased their wealth by more than $1 trillion during this pandemic. And they're now worth more than $4 trillion. My fellow Americans, trickle down. Trickle down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out. You know, there's a broad consensus of economists left, right, and center, and they agree what I'm proposing will help create millions of jobs and generate historic economic growth. These are among the highest values investments we can make as a nation. I've often said, our greatest strength is the power of our example, not just the example of our power. In my conversations with world leaders, and I've spoken to over 38, 40 of them now, I've made it known that America's back. And you know what they say? The comment I hear most often from them? So they say, we see America's back, but for how long? But for how long? My fellow Americans, we have to show not just that we're back, but that we're back to stay. And that we aren't going to go alone. We're going to do it by leading with our allies. No nation can deal with all the crises of our time, from terrorism, nuclear proliferation, mass migration, cybersecurity, climate change, as well as we're experiencing now pandemics. There's no wall high enough to keep any virus out. And our own vaccine supply, as it grows to meet our needs, and we're meeting them, will become an arsenal for vaccines for other countries, just as America is an arsenal for democracy for the world, and in consequence influence the world. But every American will have access before that occurs. Every American will have access to be fully covered by COVID-19 vaccines we have. Look, the climate crisis is not a federal alone, it's a global fight. The United States accounts, as all of you know, less than 15% of carbon emissions. The rest of the world accounts for 85%. That's why I kept my commitment to rejoin the Paris Accord, because if we do everything perfectly, it's not going to matter. I kept my commitment to convene a climate summit right here in America with all the major economies of the world. China, Russia, India, European Union. I said I'd do it in my first 100 days. I want to be very blunt about it. I had my attempt was to make sure that the world could see there was a consensus, that we are at an inflection point in history. The consensus is if we act to save the planet, we can create millions of jobs and economic growth and opportunity and raise the standard of living with everyone around the world. If you've watched anyone, you're real busy, I'm sure you didn't have much time. That's what virtually every nation said, even the ones that aren't doing their fair share. The investments I propose tonight also advance foreign policy, in my view, benefits the middle. That means making sure every nation plays by the same rules in the global economy, including China. In my discussions with President Xi, I told him, we welcome the competition. We're not looking for conflict. Well, I made absolutely clear that we will defend America's interest across the board. America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers and American industries, like subsidies from state to state-owned operations and enterprises, and the theft of American technology and intellectual property. I also told President Xi we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do with NATO and Europe, not to start a conflict, but to prevent it. I told them what I've said to many world leaders, that America will not back away from our commitments, commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to our alliances. I pointed out to him, no responsible American president could remain silent when basic human rights are being so blatantly violated. An American president has to represent the essence of what our country stands for. America is an idea, the most unique idea in history. We are created, all of us, equal. It's who we are. And we cannot walk away from that principle and, in fact, say we're with the American idea. With regard to Russia, I know it concerns some of you, but I made very clear to you that we're not going to seek escalation. But their actions will have consequences. They turn out to be true, and they turned out to be true. So I responded directly and proportionally to Russia's interference in elections and the cyber attacks on our government and our business. They did both of these things, and I told them we would respond, and we have. We can also cooperate when it's our mutual interest. We did it when we extended the New START Treaty on nuclear arms. We're working to do it on climate change. But he understands we will respond. On Iran and North Korea, nuclear program that presents serious threats to American security and the security of the world. We're working closely with allies to address the threats posed by both of these countries through diplomacy as well as stern deterrence. And American leadership means ending the forever war in Afghanistan. We have war in Afghanistan. We have without hyperbole, the greatest fighting force in the world. I'm the first president in 40 years who knows what it means to have sons serving in a war zone. Today we have service members serving in the same war zone as their parents did. We have service members in Afghanistan who were not yet born on 9/11. The war in Afghanistan, as we remember the debates here, were never meant to be multi-generational undertakings of nation building. We went to Afghanistan to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. And we said we would follow some of them on the gates of hell to do it. You've been in the Upper Konar Valley, you've kind of seen the gates of hell. And we delivered justice to bin Laden. We degraded the terrorist threat of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And after 20 years of valor, and sacrifice, it's time to bring those troops home. Look, Even as we do maintain over-the-horizon capacity to suppress future threats to the homeland. Make no mistake, in 20 years, terrorism has metastasized. The threat has evolved way beyond Afghanistan. Those of you in the intelligence committees, the foreign relations committee, defense committees, you know well, we have to remain vigilant against the threats to the United States wherever they come from. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are in Yemen, Syria, Somalia, other places in Africa, in the Middle East, and beyond. And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal this whole nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me and said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. The vast majority of men and women wearing the uniform and badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want they want to help meet this moment as well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in a very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. Congress should act. We have a giant opportunity to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice, real justice. And with the plans outlined tonight, we have a chance to root out systemic racism that plagues America and American lives in other ways. A chance to deliver real equity, good jobs, good schools, affordable housing, clean air, clean water, being able to generate wealth and pass it down through generations because you have access to purchase a house. Real opportunities in the lives of more Americans, black, white, Latino, Asian Americans, Native Americans. Look, I also want to thank the United States Senate for voting 94-1 to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to protect Asian American Pacific Islanders. Voting 94-1 to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to protect Asian American and Pacific Islanders. Enacted decisively. You can see on television the viciousness of the hate crimes we've seen over the past year for too long. I urge the House to do the same and send the legislation to my desk, which I will gladly, anxiously sign. I also hope Congress will get to my desk the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ Americans. All transgender Americans watching at home, especially young people, are so brave. I want you to know the president has your back. Another thing, let's authorize the Violence Against Women Act, which has been law for 27 years. 27 years I wrote it. It'll close the act that has to right now will close the boyfriend loophole to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. The court order said this is an abuser. You can't own a gun. It's to close that loophole that existed. You know, it's estimated that 50 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every month in America. 50 a month. Let's pass it and save some lives. The 8 victims of the mass shooting in Georgia, when 10 more lives were taken in the mass shooting in Colorado. And in the week in between those two events, 250 other Americans were shot dead in the streets of America. 250 shot dead. I know how to make progress on this issue. In the 90s, we passed universal background checks. A ban on assault weapons, high-capacity magazines hold 100 rounds that can be fired off in seconds. We beat the NRA. Mass shootings and gun violence declined. Check out the report over 10 years. But in the early 2000s, the law expired. We've seen daily bloodshed since. I'm not saying if the law continued, we wouldn't see bloodshed. More than 2 weeks ago on the Rose Garden, surrounded by some of the bravest people I know, survivors and families who lost loved ones to gun violence, I laid out several of the Department of Justice actions that are being taken to impact this epidemic. One of them is banning so-called ghost guns. These are homemade guns built from a kit that includes directions how to finish the firearm. The parts have no serial numbers, so they show up at crime scenes and they can't be traced. The buyers of these ghost gun kits aren't required to pass any background check. Anyone, from a criminal or terrorist, can buy this kit and within 30 minutes have a weapon that's lethal, but no more. I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act well. Look, I don't want to become confrontational. We need more Senate Republicans to join the overwhelming majority of Democrats to close loopholes required in background check purchases of guns. We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Don't tell me it can't be done. We did it before and it worked. Talk to most responsible gun owners and hunters. They'll tell you there's no possible justification for having 100 rounds in a weapon. Do you think deer wearing Kevlar vests? They'll tell you that there are too many people today who are able to buy a gun, but should be able to buy a gun. These kinds of reasonable reforms have overwhelming support from the American people, including many gun owners. The country should reform this, and Congress should act. This shouldn't be a red or blue issue. And no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't get fired in a crowded theater. From the very beginning, there were certain guns, weapons, that could not be owned by Americans. Certain people could not own those weapons ever. We're not changing the Constitution. We're being reasonable. I think this is not a Democrat or Republican issue, it's an American issue. I think this is not a Democrat or Republican issue, it's an American issue. Here's what else we can do. Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhaustive war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it. On day one of my presidency, I got my commitment to send a comprehensive immigration bill to the United States Congress. If you believe you need to secure the border, pass it, because it has a lot of money for high-tech border security. If you believe in pathway to citizenship, pass it. So 11 million undocumented folks, the vast majority of here, overstaying visas. Pass it. We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it. We also have to get at the root problem of why people are fleeing, particularly to our southern border from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The violence, the corruption, gangs, the political instability, hunger, hurricanes, earthquakes, natural disasters. When I was president, when I was vice president, the president asked me to focus on providing help needed to address the root causes of migration and help keep people in their own countries instead of being forced to leave. The plan was working, but the last administration decided it was not worth it. I'm restoring the program and asked Vice President Harris to lead our diplomatic effort to take care of this. I have absolute confidence she'll get the job. Now look, if you don't like the plan, let's at least pass what we all agree on. Congress needs to pass legislation this year to finally secure protection for dreamers. The young people only know America as their home. And permanent protection for immigrants. We're here on a temporary protected status who came from countries beset by man-made and natural-made violence and disaster. The pathway to citizenship for farm workers who put food on our tables. Look, immigrants have done so much for America during this pandemic and throughout our history. The country supports immigration. We should act. Let's argue over it. Let's debate it. Let's act. And if you truly want us to restore the soul of America, we need to protect the sacred right to vote. Most people more people know the last president's election than any time in American history, in the middle of the worst pandemic ever. It should be celebrated. Instead, it's being attacked. Congress passed H.R. 1 and the John Lewis voting rights act and send it to the guest right away. The country supports it, and Congress should act now. Look, in conclusion, as we gather here tonight, the image of a violent mob assaulting this Capitol, desecrating our democracy, remain vivid in all our minds. Lives were put at risk, many of your lives. Lives were lost. Extraordinary courage was summoned. The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive, and it did. But the struggle is far from over. The question of whether our democracy will long endure is both ancient and urgent. As old as our republic, still vital today. Can our democracy deliver on its promise? That all of us, created equal in the image of God, have had a chance to lead lives of dignity, respect, and possibility. Our democracy deliver to the most pressing needs of our people. Can our democracy overcome the lies, anger, hate, and fears that have pulled us apart? America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't. And I promise you, they're betting we can't. They believe we're too full of anger and division and rage. They look at the images of the mob that assaulted the Capitol, proof that the sun is setting on American democracy. But they're wrong. You know it, I know it. But we have to prove them wrong. We have to prove democracy still works, that our government still works, and we can deliver for our people. In our first 100 days together, we've acted to restore people's faith in democracy to deliver. We're vaccinating the nation. We're creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We're delivering real results so people can see it, feel it in their own lives. Opening doors of opportunity, guaranteeing some more fairness and justice. That's the essence of America. That's democracy in action. Our Constitution opens with the words, as trite as it sounds, we the people. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government. You and I. Not some force in the distant capital. Not some powerful force that we have no control over. It's us. It's we the people. In another era, when our democracy was tested, Franklin Roosevelt reminded us, in America, we do our part. We all do our part. That's all I'm asking. That we do our part, all of us. If we do that, we will meet the center challenge of the age by proving that democracy is durable and strong. Autocrats will not win the future. We will. America will. And the future belongs to America. So I stand here tonight before you in a new and vital hour of life and democracy of our nation. And I can say with absolute confidence, I have never been more confident or optimistic about America. Not because I'm president, because what's happening with the American people. We've stared into the abyss, insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain, and we, the people, did not flinch. The very moment our adversaries were certain we'd pull apart, fail, we came together, we united. With light and hope, we summoned a new strength, new resolve, to position us in the competition of the 21st century. On our way to a union, more perfect, more prosperous, and more just. As one people, one nation, and one America. Folks, as I told every world leader I've ever met with over the years, it's never, ever, ever been a good bet against America, and it still isn't. For the United States of America, nothing beyond our capacity. We can do whatever we set our mind to if we do it together. So let's begin to get together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience.
And the President of the United States addressing a joint session of Congress for the first time. Not a reason that he's not familiar with, because he served in the Senate for 3 decades and sat up there as Vice President. But this is the first time he's addressed former colleagues and new colleagues of the United States, and really a broad, bold new plan to not only build America back, in his words, but build America back better, with trillions and trillions of dollars in new spending. Our chief White House correspondent, Nancy Cordes, is here, along with our Democratic strategist, Joel Payne, who's worked on Capitol Hill and in presidential politics. And
Bread and butter economic issues, laying out dense, detailed plans when it comes to community college, child care, family, and medical leave. It was a speech telling American people what he wants to do.
And he, at a few points tonight, laid out a roadmap for what cooperation could look like on a lot of those issues. I noted at one particular point when he talked about his infrastructure plan.
Watch, but because there are so many people, we can actually hear some of the
It might be worth listening if it's a very
Listen.
small group. But then again, he may know we're listening, so.
You must have gotten that funny feeling.
Bernie Sanders, there's part of that conversation. But yeah, he's able to.
One-time opponent of Bernie Sanders on the primary stage. They were the final two standing. The two of them have worked together quite a bit with Joe Biden in the presidency. I want to get a quick report card from those watching right here with us, our roundtable, and Ron the man.
I think you broadly assign the twin mantle of someone who cares about America and a Christian on that level. However, remember most Republicans who they seated, they obviously did not like some section, including his words about.
And went on and on and on, and I look forward to the fact check on magic map about tax increases and deficit reduction. It's not possible, but he has a prerogative as president to try to pretend and wish it to be so, but not stubborn.
Maria Hart, when I first started covering the White House back in the Clinton administration in 1999, the sum total of the federal debt was about $5.7 trillion. This president is proposing to spend more than that in the next 10 years. What's the takeaway from this speech?
Table he's dealing. Let's bring in our panel, senior political analyst Britt Hume.
We also have Chris Wallace with us, host of Fox News Sunday, and Katie Pavlich, news editor at townhall.com. So let's go to Britt Hume and get your thoughts, Britt. Obviously, these sort of speeches are always a laundry list. I don't think there were a lot of surprises in there. Some of the things that might have fallen into the surprise category would be a genuine call for the unity that he spoke so much about in his inaugural address. For example, there were a couple of items where he said gun reform, things along those lines, that it could work, immigration, that there were some things that could be agreed on. What stood out to you, Brett?
Well, what stood out to me was I've covered about 45 of these by my count, and I felt about this one the same way I felt about all the rest of them. About it was that it was the best thing about it is it's over.
In normal times, it takes a very long time for the president to make it down that aisle. The members of Congress in the aisle wanting to be seen with the president. There have been times when the president at that moment signs things or otherwise poses with members on their way in. In this case, walking in, that was not what President Biden wanted to do. But now that it is done, and the opportunity is there for him to, as we've seen, and last week, ask, how's your mom? Tell her I said hi. Talk to individual members of the United States Senate, even the House, showing that he knows them. Rosa, when he had that moment with President Laura, I had to think that that moment is about child tax credit. She said her life's work.
Earlier.
That was so different than any of these addresses that you and I covered together over the years. On cold winter nights, the first week of February, here it's almost May, 88 degrees today in Washington, and the House chamber filled to only 1/8 of its capacity of what it would have been on a traditional night of a joint session or a State of the Union. I have a list of things that I found very strategic on the part of the administration to try to aim and attract voters in the middle, voters who might have voted for Trump once or even twice, and that aim and made popular positions that poll well. So, Buy American, the child care tax credit, a new record of job creation, best ever for the first 100 days of a president. Support for caregivers, elderly caregivers, ending cancer, standing up to China, repositioning competitive position in the world, ending the war in Afghanistan, lowering prescription drug prices, a blue-collar blueprint for jobs that do not require college degrees or even associate degrees, and the heralded 6% growth this year. He did speak, of course, to Democratic arguments on climate change and minimum wage, and for the Equality Act, mentioned the Balancing Women Act, gun control, immigration.
Pelosi was written up this time, the speech that she had just heard delivered by President Trump. So a very different atmosphere there in the House chamber this evening.
Yeah, speaking there with Jim Clyburn, of course, the congressman who in many ways people say, I'll deliver Joe Biden, South Carolina, and ultimately the Democratic nomination. Let's bring in Ed O'Keefe, our White House correspondent. And Ed, what stood out to you in the speech?
Well, Nora, good to be with you as we watch and continue to walk out here. First part of this speech sounded like a message much more for the rest of the country, trying to remind them what's been accomplished so far, his optimism about what's coming next, his push to get these infrastructure plans. But as the night wore on, it sort of sounded as if we were watching the president talk to Congress, not a president to the nation for Congress, trying to implore them, get these things done. Get me that policing reform bill by Memorial Day when George Floyd died. Get these other issues done. And the other interesting point, he wants to go big. But what he was signaling to them was, if there are ways you can go small and more specific on immigration or on gun control, do it and send it my way, and we'll get back to work on the bigger things. And the other point that sticks out to me on foreign policy tonight, this is probably one of the first times in this setting we've heard an American president try to talk to Congress and to the American public about the ongoing rise of China and what's coming if President Xi gets his way, other autocratic leaders around the world get their way. He talked about democracy versus autocracy and the need to make sure that democracy remains stable and strong in this country, but to do it in this setting, to try to remind his colleagues in Congress that the Chinese threat is coming, to remind Americans that he knows the Chinese leader knows what he's thinking, is something very different than we've heard before. He will continue the sales pitch tomorrow with a trip to Georgia, then to Philadelphia on Friday, and Nancy said more stops next week. But tonight, a much more data-driven conversation with people he knows well.
For Bernie Sanders to do it. And he took time to give Republicans credit for $1,400 stimulus checks. So he says it in a way that makes him appear much more in the middle of American politics than the program would be if you cast it in traditional terms. And part of the White House bet is that the country's way out ahead of America. That the American people have relied on government during the pandemic. They've watched and been desperate for government help, and they're willing to extend a little bit more at least.
And that's what was so fascinating about candidates trying to sell this plan. You hear them outline.
The joint session of the two houses now dissolved.
Pelosi closing out. Biden is still in the chamber.
Speaker's playing out the band. Yeah.
I think he's been able to stay as long as he wants. In the meantime, go to NBC Chief White House Correspondent Peter out there. Peter, typically the way these things play out, you make the big pitch, the big program, and then you go sell it. How do they plan to sell it?
Yeah, Lester, that's right. In fact, this president is going to go on the road beginning tomorrow. He will head to Atlanta. Actually, the first stop I'm told he's going to make by White House officials will be visiting Jimmy Carter, the former president, and his wife Rosalind Carter in Atlanta, Georgia. Then Senator Joe Biden, who refers to as Georgia's candidate Jimmy Carter years ago, but a show of respect to a former Democratic president. And on that topic, you really are struck by some of these moments you're seeing here, more traditional politics taking place. The president in his speech tonight would nod to Mitch McConnell, praising him, thanking him for his kindness in naming one of the cancer initiatives back in 2016 after Joe Biden, the president's late son. Just moments ago, you saw Rob Portman, the Republican.
Be a major deal maker in the weeks and months to come on one of the issues of the night. Dive into all that after his response, which comes your way in just a moment.
Next, a rising star in the GOP. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina gives the Republican response.
Professor Tim Scott. But David Brooks, let me start with you. What is your takeaway from tonight?
Well, first, we've heard a lot of these. I'm not sure I've heard one that had so many policies. The scope of Biden's activism is really evident. It's like a military-industrial complex wanted of. And so I'm just struck by how remarkably active a president he is going to be, whether you love them or not. Second, as Nish mentioned, it's really all scope as us versus the world, us versus the autocrats, the national competition, which I think is an attempt to unify us, to give us a rival to unify again.
And that came through in his argument for education. If we're going to compete with the rest of the world, how can we possibly only have 12 years of free education? We need to add 4 years to that. Johnny K. Bart, what about you?
So I'll add on to what David said and say this. I was struck by how much the president didn't have the focus on him. After 4 years of President Trump, it was always about him. Many refrains in the president's speech, one refrain was, because of all of you, or because of you. Early on in the speech, it was about the American people. Later on in the speech, it was Congress. Because of you, those of you sitting in the room, because of you, we were able to get this done. And that's not a partisan message. That is a unifying message. Yes, he did in various places in the speech take it to the Republicans to say, we need you to move and vote on these things to help the American people. But to David's point, it really was us against the world, us, all of us, the American people, solving these problems to fix the nation at home, but also to make us competitive abroad. I thought this was, despite having maybe a quarter of the people who were normally there, I agree with Lisa, it was a much more intimate speech, but I also think not being in the room, but watching on television, it still, for me, had the same energy, and I think a little more focused because we were not distracted by taunts or boos or too many standing ovations or antics that come from folks watching.
This is a very tough job. People say it every year, it's a cliche, but it's true. Following the president in this type of setting with all the bells and whistles and the try to get the presidency in the pomp and circumstance, and you got someone off in a room somewhere from the other party trying to talk to the American people for 7 or 8 minutes or whatever it happens to be to rebut. It's a huge amount of pressure. It's often a thankless job. Scott is a gifted communicator. We'll see how he performs. I would imagine that there'll be a few things that he'll point out, like how strong the economy was in 2019 before the pandemic, thanks to pro-growth policies. I think he'll talk about the price tag that we just heard from President Biden, and you can't even come close to getting from here to there with the types of tax increases he's talking about. And then maybe police reform, because that's actually he's been leading on.
Let me get Marie here, because we've just got about a minute left. He is going to apparently keep it simple, according to Senator Scott. He's going to incorporate a story, which was the subject of the Washington Post piece, into all this. And he also said this in a fundraising email, which I thought was telling. Democrats are trying to divide Americans along racial and class lines. Having a black conservative like me on national television is going to destroy their narrative. Marie, your thoughts on that?
Well, we will see how much Tim Scott puts forward proactive policy proposals and how much he criticizes Democrats, because I don't think the American people are just looking for a critique here. Look, Tim Scott gave a great speech at the RNC convention last year. He is a very, as Guy said, dynamic speaker. But the Republican Party is facing a number of challenges, including accusations that they are trying to prevent minority voters from voting in large numbers in places like Georgia. The fact that they are approved in naming legislation after his plea.
Marie, your thoughts on that?
Well, we will see how much Tim Scott puts forward proactive policy proposals and how much he criticizes Democrats, because I don't think the American people are just looking for a critique here. Look, Tim Scott gave a great speech at the RNC convention last year. He is a very, as Guy said, dynamic speaker. But the Republican Party is facing a number of challenges, including accusations that they are trying to prevent minority voters from voting in large numbers in places like Georgia. The fact that they are approved his part in naming legislation after his late son. He also went off script when he talked about Chinese President Xi Jinping. Quote, he's deadly earnest on becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world.
And here is Senator Tim Scott.
Good evening. I'm Senator Tim Scott, great state of South Carolina. We just heard President Biden's first address to Congress. Our president seems like a good man. His speech was full of good words. But President Biden promised you a specific kind of leadership. He promised to unite a nation, to lower the temperature, to govern for all Americans, no matter how we voted. This was the pitch. You just heard it again. But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. I won't waste your time with finger pointing or partisan bickering. You can get that on TV anytime you want. I want to have an honest conversation about common sense and common ground, about this feeling that our nation is sliding off its shared foundation and how we move forward together. Growing up, I never dreamed I would be standing here tonight. When I was a kid, my parents divorced. My mother, my brother, and I moved in with my grandparents. 3 of us, sharing 1 bedroom. I was disillusioned and angry, and I nearly failed out of school. But I was blessed. First, with a praying mama. And let me say this, to the single mothers out there who are working their tails off, working hard, trying to make the ends meet, wondering if it's worth it, you can bet it is. God bless your amazing effort on the part of your kids. I was also blessed by a Chick-fil-A operator, John Moniz, and finally with a string of opportunities that are only possible here in America. This past year, I've watched COVID attack every rung of the ladder that helped me up. So many families have lost parents and grandparents too early. So many small businesses too early. So many small businesses have gone under. Becoming a Christian transformed my life, but for months, too many churches were shut down. Most of all, I'm saddened that millions of kids have lost a year of learning when they could not afford to lose a single day. Locking vulnerable kids out of the classroom is locking adults out of their future. Our public schools should have reopened months ago. Other countries did. Private and religious schools did. Science has shown for months that schools are safe. But too often, powerful grown-ups set science aside, and kids like me were left behind. The clearest case I've seen for school choice in our lifetimes, because we know that education is the closest thing to magic in America. Last year, under Republican leadership, we passed 5 bipartisan COVID packages. Congress supported our schools, our hospitals, saved our economy, and funded Operation Warp Speed, delivering vaccines in record time. All 5 bills got 90 votes in the Senate. Common sense found common ground. In February, Republicans told President Biden we wanted to keep working together to finish this fight. But Democrats wanted to go it alone. They spent almost $2 trillion on a partisan bill that the White House bragged was the most liberal bill in American history. Only 1% went to vaccinations, no requirement to reopen schools promptly. COVID brought Congress together 5 times. This administration pushed us apart. Another issue that should unite us is infrastructure. Republicans support everything you think of when you think of infrastructure. Roads, bridges, ports, airports, waterways, high-speed broadband. We're in for all of that. But again, Democrats want a partisan wish list. They won't even build bridges to build bridges. Less than 6% of the president's plan goes to roads and bridges. It's a liberal wish list of big government waste. Plus, the biggest job-killing tax hikes in a generation. Experts say when all is said and done, it would lower wages of the average American worker and shrink our economy. Tonight, we also heard about a so-called family plan, even more taxing, even more spending, to put Washington even more in the middle of your life, from the cradle to college. The beauty of the American dream is that families get to define it for themselves. We should be expanding opportunities and options for all families, not throwing money at certain issues because Democrats think they know best. Infrastructure spending that shrinks our economy is not common sense. Weakening our southern borders and creating a crisis is not compassionate. The president is also abandoning principles he's held for decades. Now he says your tax dollars should fund abortions. He's laying groundwork to pack the Supreme Court. This is not common ground. Nowhere do we need common ground more desperately than in our discussions of race. I have experienced the pain of discrimination. I know what it feels like to be pulled over for no reason, to be followed around the store while I'm shopping. I remember every morning at the kitchen table, my grandfather would open the newspaper and read it, I thought. But later I realized he had never learned to read it. He just wanted to set the right example. I've also experienced a different kind of intolerance. I get called Uncle Tom and the N-word by progressives, by liberals. Just last week, a national newspaper suggested my family's poverty was actually privilege because a relative owned land generations before my time. Believe me, I know firsthand our healing is not finished. In 2015, after the shooting of Walter Scott, I wrote a bill to fund body cameras. Last year, after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I built an even bigger police reform proposal. But my Democratic colleagues blocked it. I extended an olive branch. I offered amendments, but Democrats used a filibuster to block the debate from even happening. My friends across the aisle seemed to want the issue more than they wanted a solution. But I'm still working. I'm hopeful that this will be different. When America comes together, we've made tremendous progress, but powerful forces want to pull us apart. 100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. Corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all, by doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country. It's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination. And it's wrong to try to use our painful past to dishonestly shut down debates in the present. I'm an African American who's voted in the South my entire life. I take voting rights personally. Republicans support making it easier to vote and harder to cheat, and so do the voters. Big majorities of Americans support early voting, and big majorities support voter ID, including African Americans and Hispanics. Common sense makes common ground. But today, this conversation has collapsed. The state of Georgia passed a law that expands early voting, preserves no excuse mail-in voting, and despite what the president claimed, did not reduce election day hours. If you actually read this law, it's mainstream. It will be easier to vote early in Georgia than in Democrat-run New York. But the left doesn't want you to know that. They want people virtue signaling by yelling about a law they haven't even read. Fact checkers have called out the White House for misstatements. The president absurdly claims that this is worse than Jim Crow. What is going on here? I'll tell you, a Washington power grab. This misplaced outrage is supposed to justify Democrats' new sweeping bill that would take over elections for all 50 states. It would send public funds to political campaigns you disagree with and make the bipartisan Federal Elections Commission partisan. This is not about civil rights or our racial past. It's about rigging elections in the future. And the same filibuster that the Democrats used to kill my police reform bill last year has not suddenly become a racist relic just because the shoe is now on the other foot. Race is not a political weapon to settle every issue the way one side wants. It's far too important. This should be a joyful springtime for our nation. This administration inherited a tide that had already turned. The coronavirus is on the run. Thanks to Operation Warp Speed and the Trump administration, our country is flooded with safe and effective vaccines. Thanks to our bipartisan work last year, job openings are rebounding. So why do we feel so divided? Anxious. A nation with so much cause for hope should not feel so heavy laden. A president who promised to bring us together should not be pushing agendas that tear us apart. The American family deserves better, and we know what better looks like. Just before COVID, we had the most inclusive economy in my lifetime, the lowest unemployment rates ever recorded for African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians, and a 70-year low nearly for women. Wages were growing faster at the bottom than at the top. The bottom 25% saw their wages go up faster than the top 25%. That happened because Republicans focused on expanding opportunity for all Americans. In addition to that, we've passed opportunity zones, criminal justice reform, and permanent funding for historically black colleges and universities for the first time ever. We fought the drug epidemic, rebuilt our military, and cut taxes for working families and single moms like the one that raised me. Our best future will not come from Washington schemes or socialist dreams. It will come from you, the American people, black, Hispanic, white, and Asian, Republican and Democrat, brave police officers in black neighborhoods. We are not adversaries. We are family. We are all in this together, and we get to live in the greatest country on earth. The country where my grandfather in his 94 years saw his family go from cotton to Congress in one lifetime. So I am more than hopeful. I am confident that our finest hour is yet to come. Original sin is never the end of the story, not in our souls and not for our nation. The real story is always redemption. I am standing here because my mom has prayed me through some really tough times. I believe our nation has succeeded the same way because generations of Americans in their own ways have asked for grace and God has supplied it. So I will close with a word from a worship song that really helped me through this past year of COVID. The music is new, but the words draw from Scripture. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you. In your weeping and your rejoicing, he is for you. May his favor be upon our nation for 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children. Good night, and God bless the United States of America.
And there is the Republican response to President Biden from Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. Some of his Republican colleagues urging him to run for president in 2024. Let's go now to the Capitol, and CBS's Nicole Killian is standing by. And Nicole, why did the Republican Party want Senator Scott to deliver the response?
Well, he is seen as a rising star in the Republican Party, and as you mentioned earlier, it's the Senate's only black Republican. It really has this rags to riches story, which we heard him describe a little bit in that address, much as he did during the Republican National Convention, where he also got a lot of attention to his personal story and his, really embodiment of the American dream to many. But what you also heard from him more specifically were a number of Republican themes and talking points that we have heard from Republicans for weeks now with respect to the president's approach and Democrats' approach in terms of trying to go it alone. For instance, on the COVID relief bill, contrary to the last Congress where it was a more bipartisan approach. You also heard him really rip into voting rights legislation, which I think could draw some controversy here on the Hill, and talk about police reform as well, which, as you know, he's one of the key negotiators, accusing Democrats of actually blocking his bill last time around, but feeling more hopeful this time. Nora?
All right, Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Nicole. And as Nicole just mentioned, Senator Scott leading the Republican effort on police reform, a bipartisan effort to try and get something done. President Biden mentioning the George Floyd Act, calling for its passage in his speech tonight. Let's get more on this from CBS's Chief Justice and Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues. And Jeff, they're negotiating it. They're keeping it pretty quiet. But what are some of the keys that you think that they will find agreement on? No chokeholds. What else?
Yeah, no chokeholds, this idea of no knock warrants. Obviously, that was an issue with Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky, and the raid there, the deadly raid there. But, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act right now held up in Congress. It passed the House, but it's stuck in the Senate. And the question is, will they be able to pass it by the deadline here that the president has just set, Memorial Day, George Floyd's death last year? And there are a lot of people in law enforcement who believe that legislation on its own won't be enough to ease some of the tension in communities across America right now.
Isn't one of the key issues about whether you can sue a police officer?
That is the holdup. It's called qualified immunity, and it's something that's on the books now, but there are a lot of states moving to get rid of it, to end it, so that you could sue individual police officers. But that's something that Republican senators have stated that they won't go for, and there are law enforcement organizations across the country who are against it as well. And so that's one of the major issues. There are some, though, who say, why don't you take that aspect of the legislation out and let's go forward with what we agree on.
Sure. All right, Jeff Begayes, thank you. And Joel, we heard from Senator Scott, but he's not really the one that the Republican Party puts out front in terms of many of its issues.
I think that's so right. The dominant voices you hear from the Republican Party are Marjorie Taylor Greene, former President Trump, Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy. It's great that they want to highlight a young, dynamic conservative like Tim Scott, but there's some disambiguation with what people normally hear from the Republican Party and what they saw tonight, which was a very workmanlike, yeomanlike speech from Senator Scott. We'll see if it lands.
All right, thank you.
Touch a lot of those really big touchstones for conservatives, flaying the experts, flaying Washington, invoking socialism. I thought he probably scored some points with a lot of people on the school issue. There are a lot of parents in this country who are frustrated that schools didn't open more quickly. But on your point, your first point, he did say at the end, original sin is not the end of our story. So he's acknowledging this history, even as he is making this proclamation that racism is not, the American. This is part of our story. And what people are saying is we need to confront it, and we need to understand it. So he conflicted with himself.
What also struck me was that this was not a message that was a Donald Trump message at all. He was not speaking to the base of the party, except in one area where he was refusing to give Joe Biden any credit on COVID-19. He said the tide had already turned on COVID-19 when Biden became president. And of course, everybody understands that Operation Warp Speed happened under Joe Biden, but getting vaccines into arms was a Biden operation.
Evan, just in terms of the difficulty the Republicans have kind of pinning Joe Biden as a socialist or whatever it may be, has he, as you see his evolution as a politician, does that surprise you, his ability to kind of be a difficult target in this case?
Well, you know what struck me about it, actually? There was a through line here. If you go back and you look at one of the Democratic response that Joe Biden gave, actually, in 1983, he talked about what he called two cornerstone American rights, fairness and opportunity. And what I heard tonight in the Joe Biden speech was a lot of talk of fairness and some talk of opportunity. What you just heard in the Tim Scott response was there's a lot of talk of opportunity, not a lot of talk of fairness. And I think in some ways, it misses something that is changing in the American electorate, particularly among young people,
This is how I know you are a...
These other two proposals, he plans to raise taxes on the wealthy to pay for. Do the numbers work?
Well, do the numbers work? The question is going to be, will the wealthy actually have to pay for it? He was talking about companies that don't pay taxes at all. We had 55 major corporations in the last year pay no taxes. So whether you're going from 21 to 25% is somewhat irrelevant. Are you going to close the loopholes? And this idea, we're going to tax the wealthiest Americans, it's a great idea, but time and again, we don't see that happen. So Joe Biden has put forth a huge agenda that there's many, many items that a lot of people would like to have happen, but are we going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? You said it before, he keeps going back to jobs, jobs, jobs. Let's just share a little bit of that sound.
For too long, we've failed to use the most important word when it comes to meeting the climate crisis. Jobs. Jobs. Jobs.
The best of the best performed live.
He talked about paid leave and families. He talked about childcare. He talked about free college and trade school and how we need to invest in early education and higher education. He really brought home, I think, the issue of immigration in saying this is what we need to do. Let's deal with this once and for all. And of course, he touched on any number of other things, including ending the endless war in Afghanistan. And I think that was also a really important point to who we are as a country in our global nation of allies around the world.
Congresswoman, just one other thing. We did hear just now from Senator Tim Scott in the Republican response describing what President Biden wants as a cradle to the end of school, government involvement in education in a critical way, saying this approach is the wrong approach.
Well, what I keep thinking about, and I was in an Edna Labor hearing today saying exactly this, as Republicans were saying, you know, Americans don't want government in their schools. Well, actually, the Families Plan, what people know about it, has 65% approval across the country. The Jobs and Infrastructure Plan has 68% approval across the country. The Rescue Plan is wildly successful. So yes, Americans do need help right now. They want government to come in and be the great equalizer of opportunity and to help them get back on their feet and feel like they've got a future that they can be proud of.
Representative Pramila Jayapal, very good to see you. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with us tonight. I do want to go back to one of our guest analysts, Mark Short, formerly, of course, worked, as we said, for Vice President Pence. Mark Short, what about this back and forth over government role in education and President Biden's argument that in the 21st century, 12 years of free education is simply not enough for America to compete in the world?
Well, Judy, I think it goes to the larger point that Tim Scott was making, and I think even to David's point, we should be welcoming this debate about what do we want the size and scope of the federal government to be. My wife and I have chosen to educate our children in the public schools here in this area, and you know, sadly, so much of the curriculum now moves away from science and math and instead devolves into critical race theory. And I think that there's a lot of us who don't want more government involvement in education and don't want more government involvement in our lives. And I think that is a welcome debate for Republicans. It's something that we should champion as opposed to some of the personality debates that we've been having over the last few years. So being able to have a stark contrast in what we think the size and scope of government should be is really something that we should welcome. And laying out really roughly close to $4 trillion in new tax increases from tonight is another debate that we should be welcoming to have, because the reality is that even China's lowered their corporate tax rate. If you go to the Biden-Harris proposal of 28% and you add state and local taxes that other governments don't pay, we'd be the very highest of all industrialized nations amongst what we're paying in corporate tax rates. So that's a debate we should welcome.
Mark Short joining us tonight as a guest analyst. I want to bring in another member of Congress.
Welcome back. Today,
Tim Scott did an excellent job tonight. I'm really proud to see a Republican that is not what a traditional Republican is. Republicans are reinventing themselves, and I think that Tim Scott is a good example of what Republicans could be.
The University of South Dakota encouraged all students to wear as much denim clothing as possible to show support for those who have been sexually assaulted. Many students were on board, as around campus you could see everything from denim skirts and jackets to classic blue jeans. The reason for all the denim is that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So on the last Wednesday of every April, people around the world dress in denim to show that sexual assault has nothing to do with what a victim is wearing.
We wear denim to show our support that it doesn't matter what you're wearing. You can be wearing the tightest jeans in the world, and that doesn't give anyone a reason to sexually assault you. So that's why we wear denim today, and we have a keynote speaker, Brittany Piper, who's a national speaker on sexual assault. We're just so excited to have her and her message here in our community.
Speakers at tonight's event stressed the importance of not only speaking up after an assault has happened, but also listening to those who have been hurt by sexual violence. Organizers of the event say that the University of South Dakota takes sexual assault very seriously and hopes that the campus can continue to spread awareness in the coming years. Kelsey?
Ernest, thank you. As we look ahead to tomorrow, there are a couple...
So, Molly...
No unity, right? No unity. I didn't see any unity.
So what's been the last year for you like? What's it been like?
It's been hard. I have a stay-at-home child now through the schools, being closed down. Just the fight, I think the hardest is everything we lost. The 4 great years that we had in voter irregularity, it's just, I hope to see in the future something change with voting irregularities and for our sake to want to vote again.
That's Molly in Michigan, and this is Zale. And Zale's in Hesperia, California. Hi, Zale.
Hi, how are you this evening?
How did the president do tonight?
I think he did okay. I see that he slipped up a few times, but my biggest concern is him stating that our nation is prejudiced. And I believe that further divides the nation, and it shouldn't be whatsoever, because I believe that the United States is the most robust nation in the world, dealing with other, people of color. Yes, we've had some issues with the police department and what have you, but I think that's pretty well limited in that area. And I think us as a nation, we have come together as one, quite united in many, many ways. And I just wish that he would not continue to promote that divide. That's my issue.
Well, a couple of things that the president talked about tonight: infrastructure and his new American Families Plan, which includes universal pre-kindergarten and free community college.
Well, hell, my body was telling me you got to do something.
40 years in the spotlight, 40 years, it's a center of the Democratic caucus, someone who was, voted for the Iraq War and was on the side of bankruptcy reform and these things. He's never been a radical. He's never been a socialist. As he said, I beat the socialist. Trying to essentially push through a kind of social democratic agenda in America that is very popular and has been defeated in the past by a lot of sort of culture war wedge issues. And so I just find it very effective. I mean, they're picking things that are good substantively, that Biden clearly believes in, that the Democratic coalition is behind, and things that are polling at 60, 65%. If you say to America, what do you think about getting rid of all the lead pipes in America? How's that poll? Should we not run the risk of brain poisoning our children and loved ones? Let's do it, right? And then you see counter to that in Tim Scott, the just utter ideological exhaustion of conservatism in this moment. I mean, there was a time when conservatives would have licked their chops at the sheer scope of the agenda that Biden is proposing in these 2 packages coming off COVID relief. And Scott spent a few minutes on it, and he threw some tax and spend and socialism, and then he got into the things conservatives care about, which is like the culture and what they're teaching you in school about American racism and restricting voting, which is where all the action is, which is what the base cares about. Because there's no substantive ideological agenda about the big questions of political economy in American life anymore. There's none. There's nothing there. They don't have arguments on the other side anymore. They forgot how to make them.
The post-policy era in Republican Party politics. Chris, I'm going to let you go now because I know you are coming back live for an hour at midnight Eastern time, so we're going to let you go to get prepping for that. In the meantime, we're going to bring in New York Congressman.
Guys, I'm all that videotape conclusive
on the things that matter.
And let's bring in Ed O'Keefe finally. And Ed, what does the president do now to sell this plan?
Well, first he heads back to a critical battleground state of Georgia, of course, a key state for his victory last year, and one that delivered 2 Democratic senators to Congress that made it possible for Democrats to pass that rescue plan. He'll go Friday to Pennsylvania, another critical battleground state, to talk about the infrastructure plan.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, thank you. And thanks to everybody. Our coverage will continue on our streaming network, CBSN, your local news, and tomorrow on CBS This Morning with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Thank you to all our correspondents and contributors. I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. Hope you have a good night.
Colbert Goes Live with Senator Bernie Sanders tonight on CBS.